The Skunk Works is a way of doing business, quick, quiet, and efficient. It's not just a place.
It's really about the mentality, about how we attack problems and come up with solutions.
Skunk Works really, since its beginning, has stood for innovation. It stood for products that were beyond their time, that were really futuristic.
It's the secret sauce of Lockheed Martin. It's what brings forth the innovations that are going to protect our customers into the future.
Who are the contractors that have this material, the corporations?
Well, one of them is Lockheed. And I'll tell you, I mean, I'm not saying Lockheed's the bad guys. They're doing what they were asked to do. Sure. They have lied about this because that's what they're supposed to do. But Lockheed would be one. There's a list I can give you, Congressman. Some of the big ones, the usual suspects.
Imagine you're like a hot shot engineer. You might be hot too, I don't know. But that, you're fresh out of grad school. Maybe you're like the best PhD electrical engineer. You want to do cool. You want to publish an IEEE. You want to climb the ladder corporately, and that kind of thing. A Lockheed Martin executive comes to you. Yeah, dude, I can read you into something really crazy, but you're never going to publish papers on it. You're never going to be able to tell people what you worked on, and it's probably not the most career enhancing, but if you want to work on something cool, but I can't tell you because it's unacknowledged until you sign this piece of paper, non-disclosure agreement, sorry, but here's the raw deal.
There is a place where we imagine the impossible, where the powers of machine and nature become one. And being a maverick is in our DNA. We are Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. This is where we break beyond the boundaries.
When diving into the subject of UFO crash retrievals and reverse engineering efforts, I am willing to bet one of the first names you associate with joint U.S. government and private industry UFO exploitation efforts is the largest defense contractor in the entire world, Lockheed Martin, and their infamous Advanced Development Projects Department responsible for highly classified research, development, test, and evaluation programs, also known as Skunk Works. Lockheed, more than any other contractor or private/semi-private organization in history, and sometimes even more than the United States Department of Defense itself, has become intimately entwined with UFO legacy programs. Highly classified, deep-sixed, carve-out advanced research, development, test, and evaluation programs buried under complex security protocols and waived unacknowledged special access programs existing since at least 1947, focused on the recovery, exploitation, and adaptation of technologies of unknown origin. For decades, Lockheed Martin and its famed Skunk Works have been labeled as the tip of the spear, leading U.S. defense contractor efforts to retrieve, store, and adapt non-human technologies for human control. Lockheed has been the centerpiece for numerous UFO whistleblower claims, anti-gravity/exotic propulsion paper trails, deep underground military bases, aka subterranean facility discussion, and bizarre traceable attempts to transfer non-human materials out of the corporation. These discussions are incredibly vast and poignant, and without even scratching the surface, range from Air Force Master Sergeant Edgar Fouché's accusations that Lockheed operated as a prime contractor to the triangular alien reproduction vehicle TR-3B, Ross Coulthart's recent comments, the quote-unquote tic-tac from the 2004 famed Nimitz encounter originated from the Lockheed Skunk Works. Decades of worthy analysis, Lockheed's Helendale Radar Cross-Section facility houses a subterranean facility dedicated to the study and housing of recovered UFOs, and so much more. Bizarrely, Lockheed sits in the spotlight of UFO Legacy Program accusations more so than any other contractor, federally funded research and development center, or university-affiliated research center I have ever discussed. Of course, operating as the largest defense contractor in the world brings notoriety, especially surrounding whispers of off-world technology reverse engineering. Yet still, discussions of Lockheed and UFOs dwarfs. Similar discussion around the MITRE Corporation, Northrop Grumman, SAIC/Leidos, Battelle Memorial Institute, and DOE-sponsored FFRDCs such as Sandia and Los Alamos National Labs. Lockheed's prominence in the discussion of UFO programs is so commonplace. Even David Grusch has mentioned Lockheed by name in his tremendous Joe Rogan podcast appearance, whilst keeping some of the other names mentioned above in the shadows. Lockheed Skunk Works themselves have given the civilian world cheeky winks over the years, alluding to possessing knowledge on non-human life.
My kids actually ask the same question. And whenever I go on to business trips, I come home, they ask me, how are the aliens? Did I see the aliens? Things like that. So, yeah, do the aliens exist? That's a question for another time. But in terms of what we work on, yes, we do work on classified projects. The aliens don't really enter into that.
And every now and then, Lockheed will even give unclassed nods towards absolutely mind-boggling capabilities the contractor has achieved in advanced aeronautics.
You know, right now our airplane designs are very reductionist. We have fuel over here. We have the cockpit. We have the engine. They're all separate parts. What if we could integrate those parts together in a holistic manner?
Can we do things like embed the carbon nanotubes to make conductive structure so that information doesn't flow through a wire next to a structure, but literally flows through the structure?
We'll be able to grow or make a structure that, say, is the skin of an aircraft, that inside of that is also contained the sensors or the energy storage or many different multiple functions.
New materials that are on the lab bench right now, they can literally change shape on command. They can become almost a muscular material.
We could have an airplane that optimizes its shape for the different flight conditions it's in.
Now, for long-time viewers of my channel, I have devoted a video to Lockheed before. However, in my opinion, this video is too short, too unfocused, and underdeveloped. So, during today's investigation, we will not look to retread already covered ground, but instead integrate my previous work and analysis on Lockheed Martin in all of my prior projects into new avenues, theories, and hypotheses, specifically breaking new ground on investigating Lockheed Martin's involvement with UFO Legacy Program operations, as well as diving into Lockheed's history and corporate structure that exists as a complex web perfectly structured to house highly classified, carve-out exotic projects. So, just how deeply involved is Lockheed Martin in UFO Legacy Program operations? How does Lockheed's role in clandestine carve-out R&D focused on technologies of unknown origin differ or compare to similar entities such as MITRE and Northrop Grumman? And what can we learn from a 2010s attempt by Lockheed to actually divest itself from recovered UFO materials through a PSAP, or Prospective Special Access Program? Well, join me today as we try and find out. While we attempt to neatly package my previous work on Lockheed, as well as tread new ground, exploring new avenues and identifying possible high-level Lockheed UFO Legacy Program personnel, let's take a step back and actually analyze the corporate history and structure of Lockheed to identify how and why the largest defense contractor in the world is to use a figure of speech up to its eyeballs in UFO technology and recovered hardware. As I just mentioned, Lockheed Martin is the largest defense contractor in the entire world, earning $64.65 billion in revenue in 2024 alone, outpacing its closest competitor Raytheon by over $20 billion. And a bit of an interesting side note here. According to Bloomberg Top 10 Defense Contractors, 9 out of the 10 listed entities I have directly accused of operating UFO legacy programs. Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, L3 Harris Technologies, Leidos, Booz Allen Hamilton, and Amentum. Lockheed's name is thrown around with such colossal contracts earned, money gained, or profits realized. At least I have become somewhat desensitized to the unfathomable amounts of money that passes through Lockheed for federal contracts. In fact, as recently as July 2025, Breaking Defense published an article titled, quote, "Lockheed records $1.6 billion in losses, most likely to continued strife on classified aero program," end quote, detailing losses of $950 million in the second quarter of 2025 on the, quote, "classified fixed-price aeronautics program," end quote. Lockheed stated in a news release regarding this loss, quote, "This is a highly classified program that can only be described as a game-changing capability for our joint U.S. and international customers, and therefore it is critical that it be successfully fielded. With our enhanced oversight of this program and rapid incorporation of lessons learned, we expect to continue to reduce risk over the next few years as we move through key milestones of this very advanced system," end quote. In normal words here, Lockheed has a really good reason for losing almost $1 billion. And I am absolutely not connecting the second quarter 2025 $1 billion loss to UFO Legacy Program operations. Indeed, I personally believe this likely has more to do with Lockheed losing out on the NGAD, or Next Generation Air Dominance fighter contracts given to Boeing. Nevertheless, this article shows $1 billion is nothing to Lockheed Martin. However, discussion of money is a good opportunity to briefly discuss funding avenues for UFO legacy programs. In 2023, David Grusch discussed misappropriation of funds and IRAD being utilized as a method to fund UFO legacy program operations.
Well, so then how does, I don't want to cut you off, but how does a program like that get funded?
I will give you generalities. I can get very specific in a closed session, but misappropriation of funds and
does that mean
self-fund.
Does that mean that there is money in the budget that is said to go to a program, but it doesn't, and it goes to something else?
Yes, I have specific knowledge of that. Yep.
Do you think U.S. corporations are overcharging for certain tech they're selling to the U.S. government, and that additional money is going to programs?
Correct, through something called IRAD.
Regarding misappropriation of funds, I have previously spoken of instances in which Grumman Aerospace, the precursor of Northrop Grumman, egregiously overcharged the U.S. Navy for everything from socket wrenches to ashtrays and connected these misappropriation of funds to UFO legacy programs, along with various other contractors overcharging the U.S. Navy for near billions of excess profits for submarine creation. But what is IRAD, mentioned by David Grusch prior? IRAD is a technical research and development effort by industry that is not sponsored by or required in the performance of a contract. Such projects consist within basic R&D, applied R&D, development, and system and other concept formulation studies. Quote, "Contractors can recover a portion of their IRAD costs by including them as an allowable indirect expense on government contracts, to the extent that those costs are allocable and reasonable. In addition, DoD permits major defense contractors to include allowable IRAD costs as indirect expenses on defense contracts to the extent that the IRAD activities are potentially of interest to DoD," end quote. Basically, IRAD consists of R&D activities conducted by private contractors that have potential interest to the DoD. AKA, Lockheed gets to do what they want and bill the DoD for it. In the realm of UFO Legacy Program operations, this allows Lockheed to freely pursue classified operations without traditional DoD oversight and bill the DoD for such work. And notice how I said traditional channels. I strongly believe though Lockheed may hide UFO funds through IRAD, contractors still operate such work under DoD Special Access Programs or Intelligence Community Controlled Access Programs under strict oversights of elements of DoD, IC, and R&D Masters federally funded research and development centers. In 2021 alone, Lockheed Martin spent $1.5 billion on IRAD. Lockheed has historically pursued IRAD within its advanced development programs, infamously named the Skunk Works. But these figures are puny, according to former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Catherine Austin Fitts and her legendary 2004 paper, The Black Budget of the United States. Throughout the 21st century, Fitts and her Solari report has identified dozens and dozens of trillions of dollars spent on the U.S. black budget. Specifically, Fitts has outlined 21 trillion possible dollars in unauthorized spending in the Departments of Defense and Housing and Urban Development from 1995 to 2015. Much of this money on UFO-related quote-unquote clandestine military R&D. In the paper, Fitts writes, quote, large proportion of the nation's wealth is being illegally diverted into secret, unaccountable channels, end quote. While at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Fitts came across evidence IT/accounting systems providers were responsible for the obfuscation of funds and omitting data where missing DoD funds were directed. These included IBM, DynCorp, and SAIC, Lockheed Martin, and Lockheed Martin Information Systems, which would later merge with Leidos in 2015. Now, I do know what you're probably thinking. We are already getting way too into Lockheed Martin's possible UFO program funding mechanisms. And trust me when I say there is quite a bit more corporate structure here. But let's now take a step back and analyze the entire history of Lockheed. Today, Lockheed Martin exists as the premier defense contractor in the entire world. And as of 2023, Lockheed, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing, the big five U.S. industrial-based contractors, operate as prime contractors on 74% of the U.S. Department of Defense's major defense acquisition programs. And as of 2024, Lockheed's total market capitalization exceeded $136.39 billion, and Lockheed comprised of over 122,000 employees. Lockheed really is the cornerstone American defense and aerospace manufacturer, specializing in designing, developing, and manufacturing advanced aerospace and defense systems, critical to the entire life cycle of such systems from concepting to RD&E to application. Lockheed operates in four primary divisions: Lockheed Martin Aeronautics, which houses the Skunk Works we will touch on soon, comprising roughly 39% of total company revenue. Aeronautics has built several of the U.S.'s most reliable and advanced modern-day aircraft, including the F-35 Lightning II strike fighter, the C-130 Hercules, the F-16 Falcon, and the F-22 Raptor. The engineering capabilities of this division is absolutely mind-numbing. Lockheed's second major division is the Missile and Fire Control Division, which accounts for roughly 18% of revenue. Missiles and Fire Control has constructed numerous SAM or surface-to-air missile systems, precision strike missiles, AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, and much more, while also providing support services for U.S. Special Forces. Lockheed's third division, Rotary and Mission Systems, which accounts for roughly 24% of revenue, includes numerous Sikorsky helicopters such as the UH-60 Blackhawk and CH-53 Super Stallion, while also this division constructs numerous maritime platforms such as the Aegis Combat System, littoral combat ships, and Freedom-class littoral combat ships. And Lockheed's last division, Space, accounts for roughly 18% of revenue and has achieved feats such as the Trident II ballistic missile, Orion spacecraft, and hypersonic weapons platforms. The Lockheed Martin we all know and love today, the Lockheed that sees 73% of its revenue come from U.S. government contracts, arose from a 15 March 1995 merger of the Lockheed Corporation with Martin Marietta. The 1990s saw a drastic consolidation period between U.S. defense contractors. Aerospace and defense prime contractors shrank from 51 in total to only 5. Today, this trend continues due to, quote, vertical and horizontal integrations and the entry of private equity firms performing roll-ups, end quote. And I have before analyzed Northrop's acquisitions of corporations such as TRW and Teledyne Ryan during this period, and related those transactions to consolidating UFO Legacy Program operations. So let's do the same here for Lockheed. One half of our subject today, the Lockheed Corporation, was founded in 1926 and quickly rose to prominence at the beginning of World War II with construction of the U.S. Army Air Force workhorse, the P-38 Lightning. In 1943, the Lockheed Corporation founded the now infamous Skunk Works, initially housed at Lockheed's Burbank, California plant, which Jeremy Corbell just spoke about. And Skunk Works is what I and many UFO researchers wager is the critical component of Lockheed hyper-focused on UFO Legacy Program operations. Skunk Works, aka Advanced Development Programs, was responsible for the Lockheed Corporation's most highly classified R&D projects and exotic aircraft platforms, and performs the same operations for Lockheed Martin today. Skunk Works now primarily resides at Air Force Plant 42, a location I have accused on several occasions as both participating in UFO Legacy Program operations, specifically RDT&E of alien reproduction vehicles, as well as housing access to a complex network of deep underground military bases in the Antelope Valley, California. I have theorized this network in question operates largely under Edwards Air Force Base in China Lake and connects to Lockheed's infamous Helendale radar cross-section range. More on that later. The Lockheed Skunk Works stands apart from classified divisions of rival aerospace companies such as Northrop's Advanced Technology Development Center and Boeing Phantom Works due to the incredible accomplishments of Skunk Works. The Classified Projects Division began with construction of the P-38 in 1939 and also developed world-famous aircraft such as the U-2, SR-71 Blackbird, F-117 Nighthawk, F-22 Raptor, and F-35 Lightning II. More modern day, I believe Skunk Works has served as an integral piece of developing alien reproduction vehicles, such as the Fluxliner TR-3B, and if Ross Coulthart is correct, a human-derived Tic Tac. Again, more on that later.
How do you begin to measure the infinite reaches of space? For tomorrow-minded engineers and other professionals, the tools of measurement are knowledge, intellect, imagination, and an infinite curiosity. Martin Marietta wants professionals of that caliber, the kind that helped us fulfill our major role with the Viking lander on the planet Mars, who will help us now in vital projects of exploration and communication, solar energy, spacecraft and launch systems, to probe the mysteries of the farthest stars. And here, on this imperfect Earth, defense systems, such as the MX missile, to protect the very freedoms that enable us to be tomorrow-minded. Martin Marietta Aerospace, a whole new world of careers on Earth and beyond.
But let's shift focus to the Martin Marietta Company, which was founded in 1961 with a heavy focus on tremendous success in missile and space systems. Founder Glenn L. Martin began securing contracts with the Air Force in 1955 to build ICBMs, or intercontinental ballistic missiles. Martin Marietta built a swath of advanced rockets and missiles, including the Titan rocket family, Pershing missile family, Sprint missile, and incredibly cool FGM-148 javelins. Martin Marietta also pioneered several vehicles for the U.S. space race, the Magellan spacecraft, Mars Polar Lander, and Vikings 1 and 2. Prior to its merger with Lockheed in 1955, Martin Marietta made a series of acquisitions in '93 that I believe saw the Aerospace Corporation become entwined with the UFO portfolio if it wasn't already. For example, in 1993, Martin Marietta acquired GE, or General Electric Aerospace. General Electric, on the other hand, has for decades been implicated in UFO programs. Interestingly, we can look to the work of the legendary Leonard Stringfield and his magnum opus, UFO Crash Retrieval Status Reports 1 through 7, where we can read the second-hand report of one Mrs. Smith. Smith claimed her father, under pseudonym Y.R., served in World War II and then worked as a millwright for General Electric. Y.R. was apparently sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for special work. Here, Y.R. was taken to an underground installation where he worked on what appeared to be a recovered extraterrestrial craft. In a nearby quote-unquote morgue, biologics were stored that were described as short humanoids that were small with large heads and clammy skin similar to a reptile. I do believe I have tracked down this now deceased engineer who retired in 1982 and will be reaching out to his family to respectfully learn more. In 1993, Martin Marietta also acquired General Dynamics Space Systems Division. General Dynamics, of course, is another corporation implicated in UFO legacy programs, and one day I would also like to make a video about them. And lastly, and most important here in my opinion, in 1993, Martin Marietta acquired management contracts for Sandia National Laboratories. If you have watched even a single video of mine, you will know Sandia is a usual tricky customer of this channel. I do, however, want to hold off speaking on Sandia for just a few minutes and talk about Sandia post-merger with Lockheed and Martin Marietta. And prior to their merger, both Lockheed and Martin Marietta demonstrated a keen interest in anti-gravity and electrogravitic, aka an exploration of the relationship between gravity and electromagnetism research. Take Thomas Townsend Brown, for example, and his proposed Project Winterhaven to create flying discs for the U.S. military that could travel in excess of 1,800 miles per hour. I will not even try to do justice on T. Townsend Brown. To learn more here, I highly, and I mean highly, suggest watching Jesse Michaels' documentary, which is one of the best produced pieces in the UFO space I have ever seen. In 1956, a Special Weapons Study Unit of Aviation Studies International Limited delivered an examination of electrogravitic systems to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, referring to T. Townsend Brown's aforementioned Project Winterhaven. The report stated the Glenn L. Martin Company was confident gravity control could be achieved in sizable scales within years, and General Electric, Bell Labs, Sperry Rand, Boeing, and the Lockheed Corporation were all working on anti-gravity rigs. There are compelling arguments anti-gravity technology was sequestered to the world of black budget programs around 1955 and 1956. Another topic for another day, but intriguing, both Martin Marietta and the Lockheed Corporation could have been integral pieces here. Let's return now to the modern day. And as I mentioned earlier, Lockheed Martin is a DIB, or Defense Industrial Base contractor. Part of the network of organizations, of facilities, and resources that provides the U.S. government, particularly the Department of Defense, with defense-related materials, products, and services. The Defense Industrial Base, in my opinion, allows us a perfect snapshot to understand the very skeletal structure of UFO Legacy Program operations. Quote, DIB encompasses a wide variety of entities, including commercial firms operated on a for-profit basis, not-for-profit research centers and university laboratories, and government-owned industrial facilities. It provides everything from large, technologically sophisticated weapon systems and highly specialized operational support to general commercial products and routine services. By supplying and equipping the armed services, the DIB enables the United States to execute national strategy and develop, maintain, and project military power, end quote. Lockheed exists as a cornerstone entity of the commercial sector of the defense industrial base, alongside FFRDCs and UARCs, DoD laboratories, and DoD ranges and test facilities, aka MRTFBs, or major range and test facility bases. Let's go ahead and break down each one of these further, starting with Lockheed in the commercial sector. Recently, in my project on SAIC, I discussed how contractors such as SAIC and Lockheed Martin are eligible contractors under the DoD's Corporate Portfolio Program. This Corporate Portfolio Program gives defense industrial base contractors like SAIC and Lockheed Martin access to DoD executives, scientists, and management with broad access to Special Access Program portfolios. The Corporate Portfolio Program framework was established in 2020 under then Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, L&M Lord. And in an almost comical sequence of events, Lord would join SAIC's advisory board in July of 2021. And as I say in every single one of my projects, I believe core components of the DIB, specifically federally funded research and development centers, FFRDCs, and university-affiliated research centers, UARCs, are the missing critical piece to any discussion of UFO Legacy Program operations.
Have you ever flown in a jet, used GPS, taken shelter from severe weather, undergone cancer treatment, or marveled at the Mars rover? You probably didn't know it, but you are benefiting from the ideas and achievements of FFRDCs. FFRDC stands for Federally Funded Research and Development Center. FFRDCs are independent, not-for-profit organizations. They support our nation with a unique combination of technical expertise and unbiased advice. Compared to the government and industry, FFRDCs are small in size, but they have had enduring impact. They develop groundbreaking technologies, perform in-depth analyses, and help the government make cost-effective choices. The first FFRDCs began in the 1940s following World War II. Back then, the government agencies needed to build a critical mass of science and technology knowledge unavailable within their own ranks or the commercial sector. Those first FFRDCs focused largely on national security.
FFRDCs and UARCs are really two sides of the same coin, not-for-profit, private sector organizations that are established and funded to meet special long-term engineering, research, development, or other analytic needs that cannot be met as effectively by government or other private sector resources. FFRDCs specifically consist of workshops or laboratories to bring extremely specialized, unrivaled RDT&E to defense industrial base programs. In my research, I exhaustively state FFRDCs are the missing link in United States DoD/IC and defense contractor UFO legacy programs. Over the course of my work, I have directly accused numerous FFRDCs as operating as program managers for UFO legacy programs, serving as subject matter experts and R&D aces for UFO programs, allowing the DoD/IC to retain a firm grasp over technologies and keep sensitive program information in-house, only delegating information, materials, or access to defense contractors on a strict need-to-know basis. FFRDCs in question here I have spoken about prior include the MITRE Corporation, Aerospace Corporation, RAND Corporation, Sandia National Labs, the Center for Naval Analyses, Los Alamos National Labs, Lawrence Livermore National Labs, the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center managed by Battelle, National Security Engineering Center, Oak Ridge National Labs, and many more. Now, you may have noticed multiple listings above ending in labs. This is because numerous FFRDCs, including Sandia, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and more, are sponsored by the Department of Energy. This allows such laboratories and sites, if operating technologies of unknown origin exploitation programs, which I highly suspect they are, to enjoy freedoms only entities attached to the Department of Energy can enjoy. These include harnessing DOE NEST, or Nuclear Emergency Support Teams, and DOE SRT, or Special Response Teams, that I actually believe were active on-ground units in the cases of Jonathan Weygandt and Roderick Castle, respectively. This also means any classified programs at the sites can rest upon the 1954 Atomic Energy Agreement, which has been identified in the UAPDA legislation as acting as a gatekeeping structure for myriad UFO materials, knowledge, artifacts, etc., sequestering such into the deepest bowels of United States classification as, quote, trans-classified foreign nuclear information, end quote. Now, let's take a pause here because I do want to talk a little bit about both Sandia and Oak Ridge FFRDCs here. I have talked about Sandia National Labs earlier in this project, as well as numerous other projects, as housing recovered UFO craft and participating in material exploitation projects. I will not retread this research now, but please feel free to explore any of these projects on screen now. But Oak Ridge, well, Oak Ridge is very interesting. Oak Ridge is an FFRDC site where disgraced former head of Aero Sean Kirkpatrick ran to in December 2023, operating as Chief Technology Officer for Defense and Intelligence Programs.
It almost looks like Aero operated as a counterintelligence operation to get people to come in, tell their stories, and then discredit all of them. I can't imagine that any whistleblower or witness will ever go to Aero again because of what happened under the first director, who's now long gone, but still seems to act as the spokesperson for that organization.
And I would say, Madam Chair, maybe at some point we need to really dig deep into Aero, and I would encourage us.
Oh, I'd be happy to send maybe a subpoena to Mr. Kilpatrick.
That'd be fun.
Now, the following here is conjecture. I cannot back this up with any research or data. However, I must say this, I have spoken to sources intimately familiar with Oak Ridge that have informed me that 2 recovered non-human saucers reside in an underground installation below Oak Ridge. These sources claim Oak Ridge is integral to the study and exploitation of technologies, specifically vehicles of unknown origin, and that Oak Ridge is a key piece of the defense industrial base that operates in the construction, design, and possible testing of alien reproduction vehicles. And again, guys, I cannot back up these statements, but figured a little bomb like this would be fun to discuss. I mention Sandia and Oak Ridge because of their intimate ties with Lockheed. Oak Ridge is now managed by an LLC under Battelle Memorial Institute. If you don't know Battelle, watch my video on them and Dugway Proving Ground. Oak Ridge was previously managed, however, by Lockheed Martin Energy Research Corp., a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin focused on energy R&D. And as of 1 May 2017, Sandia National Labs acquired a new administrator, National Technology and Engineering Solutions of Sandia LLC, a subsidiary of Honeywell International, Inc. Honeywell, of course, received assets and divisions from Sperry Rand that went defunct in 1986. Sperry Rand was mentioned alongside Bell Labs as a contractor working on adapting UFO technologies for human use by Colonel Philip J. Corso of the U.S. Army Foreign Technology Division. Several other companies besides Honeywell received assets and divisions from Sperry Rand. These included Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Lockheed Martin. But, of note here, prior to a Honeywell subsidiary, Sandia was administered by the Sandia Corporation, a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. From 1993 to 2017, Martin Marietta / Lockheed Martin managed Sandia National Labs, which is one of the most critical sites in all of my own personal research. After all, Air Force Master Sergeant Edgar Fouché would state the reverse-engineered triangular alien reproduction vehicle, TR-3B, that began prototyping in the 1970s up to its operational flights in 1994, whose program was contracted by Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, and Teledyne Ryan and managed by the NRO, NSA, and CIA, saw its propulsion systems reverse-engineered from non-human craft by Sandia National Labs and Lawrence Livermore National Labs. Quite a few interesting connections here to make from Fouché's statements. Fouché stated Lockheed was a critical contractor on TR-3B, and Sandia was part responsible for reverse-engineering TR-3B's propulsion devices. It is interesting, then, that Martin Marietta took control of Sandia National Labs in 1993. Solely 1 year after, in 1994, TR-3B allegedly left the prototyping stage into operational stages. And solely 1 year after that, in 1995, Lockheed Corporation and Martin Marietta merged. But there are even more wild parallels to draw here, such as Fouché stating TR-3B were often operated out of Edwards Air Force Base by ACE test pilots of the Edwards 412 Test Wing, AFFTC, or Air Force Flight Test Center. These statements by Fouché relate closely to one witness I hold in extremely high regard. And if you've watched my channel before, you will know what I'm going to say. Ed. Ed retired as an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel who graduated test pilot school at the aforementioned AFFTC and operated an electronics warfare group out of Edwards 412 Test Group. Ed claimed to serve as a strategic debriefer for ARV pilots and ARV scientists, and would also claim when he was briefed into the existence of this ARV testing program that existed between Edwards Air Force Base, Area 51 Groom Lake, and Area 51 S4 sometime between 1998 and 2002, Boeing and Lockheed were the two most critical contractors on this program. There exists an utterly fascinating network to explore here, seen as I also wager this ARV program that's housed at Edwards, Area 51, and S4, that's operated largely by the 412th Test Wing, Lockheed Martin, and perhaps various naval departments and installations, is the exact same program that was operating the enormous logic-defying Triangle and Black Ops team U.S. Marine Corps Sergeant Roderick Castle encountered between the 2nd and 14th March 1997, during the Hunter Warrior Advanced Warfighting Experiment just 45 miles southeast of the Edwards R-2508 restricted airspace. You know, perhaps one day I will make a whole video detailing my hypothesis on the extensive alien reproduction vehicle theory residing in the American Southwest that involves numerous MRTFBs, FFRDCs, contractors, DOMs, Air Force units, Navy units, and more. And this bridges us perfectly into discussing Lockheed's involvement with another pillar stone of the defense industrial base. MRTFBs, or Major Range and Test Facility Bases. 23 such critical core DoD RDT&E infrastructure sites exist that span millions of acres in the continental United States. 8 Army sites, including the West Desert Test Center and Yuma Test Center. 6 Navy sites, including Naw-Kad-Pax River and China Lake. 7 Air Force sites, including Edwards 412 Test Wing and the Nevada Test and Training Range and Utah Test and Training Range. And 2 defense agency sites, including sites at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and Fort Meade, Maryland.
The American warfighter, the heart of the best trained and equipped military force ever known. Our commitment to these brave men and women through the Department of Defense acquisition process provides superior combat capability to dominate the battlespace. The Major Range and Test Facility Base, or MRTFB, is the core set of DoD test and evaluation installations, facilities, and ranges, providing world-class capabilities. It's an essential national asset that guarantees our warfighters can trust the systems they need to prevail anytime, anywhere.
It is safe to assume Lockheed Martin performs advanced classified RDT&E work at almost, if not every single MRTFB, and that the overwhelming majority of this work is just on standard prosaic defense research and development programs. However, I do also believe that MRTFBs serve as critical test and evaluation sites for UFO Legacy Program operations, ranging from storing recovered craft to operating ARV vehicles. Let's briefly analyze Lockheed's involvement with a handful of select MRTFBs I have covered in the past to see how critical Lockheed really is with these critical cores. As just mentioned, Witness Ed claimed Lockheed Martin and Boeing were paramount contractors to a joint ARV testing program out of Edwards Air Force Base and facilities surrounding Area 51 Groom Lake. Lockheed performs critical work between Edwards 412 Test Pilot School and Air Force Plant 42, both of which are located in and around the Antelope Valley, California. Lockheed Martin, specifically Skunk Works, is one of 3 facilities alongside Boeing and Northrop Grumman that has access to Plant 42's unique government-operated airfield complex that sees collaboration with pilots from the Edwards AFFTC. And interesting to note as well, Air Force Plant 42 is one of 4 Air Force plants situated throughout the United States that's managed by the Acquisition, Environmental, and Industrial Facilities Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. If you are new to this channel, I'm sure you likely already associate Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with recovered UFOs. And before we move on, we may as well give a quick overview of my previous investigations on Air Force Plant 42. I have accused Plant 42 as operating as an integral piece to American Southwest UFO RDT&E. Nestled within the Antelope Valley near Edwards Air Force Base, the former Norton Air Force Base, Lockheed and Northrop's radar cross-section ranges, and major areas of operations for the Lockheed Skunk Works and its lesser-known competitors Boeing Phantom Works and Northrop's Advanced Technology Development Center, I strongly believe Plant 42 and its Big 3 contractors are a worthy pursuit to study UFO Legacy Program operations. Indeed, Plant 42 and Norton Air Force Base have become critical pieces of the first-hand testimony of Brad S. and the second-hand testimony of Mark McCandless regarding the Fluxliner alien reproduction vehicles. Viewers of my channel know that I hold this case in extremely high regard. Amidst the numerous death threats from Brad, there is quite a tremendous amount of valuable data to chew on with the Fluxliner encounter. I will not waste my time milling over the details here, but recall variances in testimony regarding the first-hand witness Brad S. informing Aviation Week and Space Technology senior editor Bill Scott that the 3 Fluxliner flying saucers were shown in a special classified section of the now-defunct Norton Air Force Base in 1988. And Mark McCandless stated shortly before his death in 2021, Brad and other high-value targets were actually flown from Norton to Plant 42 to be shown the Fluxliner ARVs.
These people were all in this group of dignitaries, both military and civilian, that got on a military version of the Boeing 727, and they flew from Norton Air Force Base up to Air Force Plant 42, which is in Palmdale. A lot of people just consider it the Palmdale Airport. It was actually a facility that was built, from what I understand, by Lockheed back in the 1960s. And the hangar that is now serving as a Skunk Works hangar was the original construction site for the L-1011 Lockheed TriStar airliner.
Regarding this case, I am still trying to resolve this piece of the puzzle. I have come to the conclusion Brad S. was likely far more involved in the Fluxliner story. In my opinion, Brad S. likely worked on design or various systems of the craft and leaked details to his good friend Mark McCandlish for unknown reasons. If Brad S. doesn't make good on his death threats, I really will try to get to the bottom of this case. But let's move on with Lockheed's interactions with elements of DIB. Now, specifically MRTFBs, I've accused of involvement in UFO Legacy Program operations. And I would here like to narrow in on the Nevada Test and Training Range, formerly known as the 98th Range Wing. Another MRTFB Ed claimed was involved in Joint Air Force American Southwest and Lockheed ARV programs. The mission of NTTR is to provide the U.S. warfighter a, quote, flexible, realistic, and multi-dimensional battle space to conduct testing, tactics, development, and advanced training in support of U.S. national interests, end quote. And another quote, as a major range test and facility base activity, the NTTR supports the Department of Defense's Advanced Composite Force Training, Tactics, Development, and Electronic Combat Testing, as well as DoD and the Department of Energy Testing, Research, and Development. The NTTR hosts numerous Red Flag and U.S. Air Force weapons school exercises each year, as well as various test and tactics development missions, end quote. NTTR itself houses numerous Air Force bases and DoD facilities, including acknowledged sites such as Nellis Air Force Base, Area 51 Groom Lake, operated by a detachment of the Edwards 412th Test Wing MRTFB, and the Tonopah Test Range. Numerous alleged sites are said to reside on the NTTR that deal with UFO programs, such as S4 near Papoose Lake, and myriad smaller bases connected to a network of deep underground military bases that serve to train clandestine UFO crash retrieval teams, and I do hope I can explore this point further another time. Of course, Lockheed does tremendously important work on the NTTR, such as participating in the yearly Red Flag Advanced Aerial Combat Training exercises hosted at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, where Lockheed has historically worked with DoD and IC agencies, such as the NGA, to maximize U.S. warfighter potential. But believe it or not, I want to zoom in on the NTTR, not S4, Area 51 Groom Lake, or any similar site, but to the Tonopah Test Range.
In 1957, Sandia Corporation established Tonopah Test Range in Nevada as a place for the Atomic Energy Commission to test ballistics and non-nuclear features of atomic weapons. 60 years and many upgrades later, the range has a similar primary mission.
I would now like to take the time to publicly accuse Air Force and Department of Energy Tonopah Test Range, also sometimes known as Area 52, and yeah, I know, not Dugway Proving Ground in this instance, as an RDT&E site that operates UFO crash retrieval and material exploitation programs. And at least prior to 2017, Tonopah and its operations were run by Lockheed Martin. Let me explain. Tonopah Test Range, like Area 51 Groom Lake, is operated by a detachment of the Edwards 412th Test Wing. However, due to the classified nature of Tonopah's operations, personnel, commanders, etc. are classified. Tonopah appears as a mini Area 51, featuring a primary airfield, runway, and numerous hangars, with about 4 minor quote-unquote abandoned airfields existing on the Tonopah range. Area 52 here resides in the highly restricted and secretive northern area of the NTTR, part of the Great Basin Desert that lies mostly within the Cactus Flat Valley. The population near Tonopah is incredibly sparse, with the nearby town of the same name housing only 1,938 people as of 2023. Officially, quote, Tonopah is the test range of choice for all national security missions. Tonopah Test Range, TTR, provides research and development test support for the Department of Energy's weapons programs. The range also offers a unique test environment for use by other government agencies and their contractors, end quote. And yeah, that's right. Tonopah exists as a classified restricted military installation of the DoD and Department of Energy, which began in 1957 as a DOE weapons program range managed by Sandia National Laboratories. Now remember, we just talked about Sandia, but in case you forgot, I urge you to remember that this federally funded research and development center is an integral piece of my channel that I speak about, ranging all the way from discussing UFO retrieval operations with the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit in 1947 to involvement in operating on the TR-3B ARV from the 1970s onward. And remember that Sandia was, up to 2017, administrated by the Sandia Corporation, a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. This means from 1993, when Martin Marietta acquired contract management for Sandia National Labs, all the way up until 2017, Lockheed Martin managed this extremely sensitive range focused on Department of Energy weapons testing occupied by the Edwards 412 Test Wing MRTFB. In fact, beginning in 2007, Lockheed radio telemetry data at the Tonopah test range was detected between the TTR 0.7 miles west from the south end of the runway, to be specific, and 1011 Lockheed Way, Building 601 in Palmdale, California. Seen as Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Corporation residing in Palmdale, California, in the Antelope Valley, is home to the Skunk Works Advanced Development Division, I think it is quite safe to say whatever Lockheed was doing at Tonopah required Lockheed's sharpest engineers operating in the classified Deep Sixth SAP world. Indeed, Lockheed's F-117 Nighthawk, designed out of Skunk Works, initially operated and tested in secret at Tonopah for almost a decade. But let's really dive in here to see what connections we can make between Tonopah and UFO Legacy Program operations. The only UFO researcher I have seen make such a connection before, and he did so in reference to leaked information given to him, is the legend Richard Dolan. In 2021, Dolan detailed information leaked to him from a source familiar with the classified UAP Task Force report presented to Congress. The classified report apparently discussed energy pulse propulsion systems, ion propulsion systems, anti-gravity propulsion systems, antimatter propulsion systems, ramjet hydrogen propulsion systems, compressed nuclear propulsion systems, and advanced uses of exotic elements for energy research dealing with recovered non-human technologies. According to Dolan's source, these highly classified projects were spearheaded by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and managed by a classified group called Advanced Group 6. This source stated all funding for these projects are black budget confidential funds, and some come from private contractors themselves, aka what we spoke about earlier, IRAD. Prototyping of these crafts utilizing the above technology, including platforms leveraging exotic non-human materials and systems, according to this source, are flown out of Area 51 and Tonopah Test Range. The source stated these craft were operated solely within the Nevada Test and Training Range, which actually does comport with the testimony of Ed.
I want to talk about that as well. I want to share with you information that was leaked to me just about an hour before I went live. All right. And that's why I had to work this in. So it's a statement. I'm going to show it to you, and I'm going to read it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So this is the text of what was sent to me just a little while ago. I'm going to read it. So this was not written by my source. This was written to my source, which was then sent to me. All these highly classified projects are under the control of the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, and being managed by a classified group called Advanced Group 6. Advanced Group 6. All funding for these projects is black confidential funds appropriated under intelligence operations costs. Some funds come from private contractors. That's interesting. And then listen carefully to this part. Prototypes of flying crafts utilizing the above technology are being flown at Area 51 and Tonopah Air Force Base Test Range. Some of the UAPs observed in and around Nevada can be and this is, I think, a mistaken word. They say contributed, and I think the author means to say attributed. So I'm going to read it correctly. Some of the UAPs observed in and around Nevada can be attributed to crafts using the above propulsion systems. However, and listen carefully to this, please, none of the experimental crafts have flown outside the Nellis test and training range.
Seen as Lockheed managed Sandia that ran Tonopah just 4 years between this 2021 and rumored classified 2021 report, this directly implies Lockheed was involved in both RDT&E of these craft and funding these programs through IRAD. But this Advanced Group 6 here, I can find nothing about them. If you watching have anything to add here regarding Advanced Group 6, please, by all means, let me know. But back to Lockheed and the history of Tonopah. Recall that Tonopah is the test range of choice for all security missions. Sandia and formerly Lockheed out here conduct missions in direct support of the Department of Energy's weapons programs. Alongside DOE, Tonopah Range also offers a, quote, unique test environment for use by other U.S. government agencies and their contractors, end quote. Other clandestine and secretive program activities at TTR include robotics testing and development, smart transportation-related testing, aka pre-programmed / remote-controlled air and ground vehicles, infrared tests, and rocket development testing and deployment. TTR consists of land-supporting personnel barracks, one major and several minor airfields, admin and range control offices, emergency services, vehicle maintenance shops, facilities maintenance shops, fuel storage areas, classified storage depots, and if my understanding is correct, a deep underground military base. Of course, in my work, I have traditionally referred to Dugway Proving Ground as Area 52. After all, this over 1,500 square mile site, housing both the West Desert Test Center and sections of the Utah Test and Training Range MRTFBs, has been accused of continuing on the legacy of select UFO programs originating from Area 51 Groom Lake. I strongly believe Dugway engages in contractor-led UFO legacy programs both above ground near the Avery section of the West Desert Test Center and in an enormous subterranean facility located under Granite Peak. I can't recommend enough checking out my Dugway project. It is one of my all-time favorite projects, and there is so much to chew on there. But outside of Dugway, Tonopah here is also known as Area 52, and sometimes even Area 54. In fact, TTR was referred to as Area 52 as early as 1957 in Atomic Energy Commission maps. And we can even find 1997 documents from the DOE specifically referring to Tonopah as Area 52. Now, mention of the Atomic Energy Commission, Tonopah's founding entity, is quite critical here. Tonopah arose from 1950s Atomic Energy Commission efforts to survey for an ideal site for permanent ballistics test ranges for unarmed nuclear weapon shapes. Funny enough, the site for Tonopah was eventually recommended in 1956 by the Naval Air Special Weapons Facility, which is now known as the NAW-CWD, Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division, which is primarily located at China Lake, another usual suspect of this channel. Remember how I often state, as I did earlier in this project, the Atomic Energy Commission has highly likely used the 1954 Atomic Energy Agreement to black hole and sequester UFO Legacy Program operations into the deepest of deep-sixed programs under quote-unquote trans-classified foreign nuclear information. One really must wonder if perhaps China Lake and the Atomic Energy Commission chose such an isolated and classified location to work on AEC and successor agencies' UFO Legacy Program operations. Perhaps areas like the classified storage area surrounded by a double row of barbed wire in the already highly secured northern NTTR at Tonopah store more than just weapons. Though TTR is a range managed by Edwards 412th Test Wing and the Nevada Test and Training Range, formerly known as the 98th Range Wing, which are two Air Force MRTFBs, the Navy seemed to take more than a keen interest in Tonopah than just allowing China Lake to suggest a site. In fact, in the early days of Tonopah, the Naval Air Special Weapons Facility began conducting special weapons testing on the TTR in conjunction with the Atomic Energy Commission. This mission expanded its focus from just equipping naval aircraft with nuclear weapon capabilities to encompassing air, surface, and subsurface launched nuclear weapons, including the Polaris, Poseidon, and Trident submarine-launched ballistic missile systems. If you recall the Polaris submarine program, this project was spearheaded by Admiral William F. Rayborn, who would go on to serve on the board of directors of both Wackenhut and SAIC. Chief Scientist of Special Projects to the Navy, John Pena Craven, would state in 1965 he was briefed into one Project Sand Dollar after being tasked with spearheading the 1964 Deep Submergence Systems Project that saw the Navy drastically improve deep-sea engineering and exploration capabilities. Craven here would state the DSSP operated to satisfy the whims of aforementioned Sand Dollar, a clandestine, highly compartmentalized project that was tasked to retrieve militarily sensitive hardware and other items with national security importance from the seafloor of the continental shelf and deep marine environments. And in the past, I have directly associated Sand Dollar with maritime UFO crash retrieval operations. In fact, the acknowledged principal craft created under DSSP, DSRV, or Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicles Mystic and Avalon, were, after all, created by Lockheed. However, Craven stated Sand Dollar was nestled within a complex web of programs, itself hidden within the Polaris program that was actually conducted at Tonopah. Naval operations ceased at Tonopah in 1993, and shortly after, Lockheed Martin took charge of operations at the range. There are theories here that are quite interesting to me. Lockheed created undersea submersibles to satisfy a deep ocean engineering project, Sand Dollar, that I wager was tasked with retrieving underwater UFOs. This program was hidden within the Polaris program under Admiral Rayborn, which was conducting testing operations at Tonopah, a clandestine Atomic Energy Commission Sandia National Lab site Lockheed would command administration of shortly after Navy ceased operations at the range. Mysteries surrounding Tonopah are plentiful, and I've at least learned from private conversations that Tonopah is where quite a bit of the quote-unquote interesting stuff is stored. Just what sort of clandestine operations did Lockheed engage with in its near 22 years administrating Sandia National Labs and Tonopah? Could Lockheed have spearheaded and funded through IRAD much of the alleged leaked information detailed by Richard Dolan that apparently is conducted at the range? And last thing here for all my Area 51 S4 aficionados, Tonopah actually contains its own acknowledged Site 4. Indeed, we can reference the undated, unclassified Sandia TTR map shown on screen earlier, and we can zoom into the East TTR to observe 2, possibly 3 locations labeled as Site 4. This specific area of TTR is managed by the Air Force 554th Range Squadron in support of the Tonopah Electronic Combat Range. If an Air Force Range Squadron sounds familiar, I have previously implicated the 388th Range Squadron of the UTTR as participating in Dugway Proving Ground UFO Legacy Program operations. On the map, we can see in Roman numerals Site 4, an additional marker S4, and one last marker TEWR, or Tonopah Electronic Warfare Range, HQ Compound Site, and either S4 or 54. I personally believe this label clearly shows 54 in reference to Area 54, but some still argue this text displays S4. According to Other Hand, a fantastic now defunct blog, workers in TTR were permitted and perhaps even encouraged to live in nearby communities outside of the Tonopah Range. Site 4 employees, however, were required to utilize commuter flights from Las Vegas, aka the illustrious and mysterious red-striped Janet Airlines, that flew employees directly to Area 51 and Tonopah. In fact, we can even see a Janet airliner in this clip here. Other Hand states Site 4 employees being required to transit to Tonopah via Janet speaks to the secrecy of Site 4 in the already highly secretive TTR. While no direct reports have come from Tonopah Site 4 regarding UFO legacy programs, the private sources who informed me Tonopah stores quite a number of the quote-unquote interesting stuff also claim that Tonopah Site 4 is directly involved in UFO operations. Over the years, some have tried to claim Bob Lazar ripped Site 4 from Tonopah to construct a fantasy regarding the Area 51 auxiliary site, built into the side of the mountains resting on Papoose Dry Lake bed. I personally do not agree with this assessment at all, as I am quite confident that Area 51S4 is indeed a very real site near or exactly where Mr. Lazar claims it resides, and does indeed feature hangars disguised to appear as local terrain. During the course of our investigation today, we have already talked so much about Lockheed Skunk Works, also known as the Advanced Development Programs Division, infamously regarded for its highly classified efforts to develop some absolutely stunning aircraft, aerospace, and national security technologies. Such platforms include the F-117 Nighthawk, SR-71 Blackbird, U-2 spy plane, F-35 Lightning II, F-22, and much more. Skunk Works, operating largely out of Air Force Plant 42, has also been accused for decades of designing, engineering, and constructing alien reproduction vehicles. Now, I know I harp on him quite a bit, but one area in which I very much agree with Dr. Stephen Greer is where he claims the Lockheed Skunk Works operates out of Air Force Plant 42 and Helendale Lockheed Radar Cross-Section Facility in a joint network of UFO Legacy Program facilities.
What is this name of the place you were talking about? And I want to go to the Jake Barber clip. What is the name of the place, the Anthill Lockheed, that picture that you showed? What's the name of it if Rob wanted to just search for it?
Well, this is the, I think the Howland, it's just the Lockheed Skunk Works test range.
Lockheed Concourse?
Skunk Works. Lockheed Skunk Works. So it's an RCS range. It's a range where they test. And I have some other images we can give you where you'll see there's what looks like a runway, right? You got a runway back here at this jetport.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a runway. You look at there are diamonds on what looks like a runway. That's where the man-made anti-gravity craft that Lockheed makes come up out of the ground, hover over the diamond, and then they're struck with certain directional energy weapons to see how sturdy they are and how stable they are. And most of them are hardened enough, but occasionally one goes down.
Is that what you're talking about right there?
Correct. So you see those diamonds. That is not a runway. So they come up and they float over those diamonds at various distances. And so that's where you test these objects. And they're electrogravitic, meaning they're not conventional propulsion systems. So there's no rockets, there's no jets, etc.
If this is the first time you are hearing about the Tejon or Helendale RCS ranges, you must be new to my channel and welcome in. I recommend watching my DUMBS video or video on Northrop Grumman to learn more. These radar cross-section ranges operate or operated to test stealth airframes' radar cross-sections. Because these sites were built during the Cold War, much of these facilities exist below ground. Now, I'm in full agreement here with Greer that elements of Northrop out of Tejon and Lockheed Skunk Works out of Helendale are a critical piece of Antelope Valley UFO Legacy Program operations. Where I get frustrated with Greer and mention of Skunk Works, however, are his definitive claims without hypothesis, documentation, or evidence that the octagonal alien reproduction vehicle Michael Herrera observed in 2009 was derived from the Lockheed Skunk Works. I suppose this information is quote-unquote proprietary to Greer's team, as I have tried to seek further answers on this specific claim from individuals who maintain a relationship with Greer, but I was told that this information around Herrera and the Skunk Works Octagon is confidential. But in a similar vein, Greer also stated he knew for a fact the 2004 Nimitz Tic Tac originated from the Lockheed Skunk Works.
So like when David Fravor and I first spoke, who was the F-18 Hornet pilot, and it was a serendipitous meeting because there's a band called Godsmack. That's a heavy metal band.
Yeah.
And the lead guy, Sully Arnott, is a friend of mine. And it turned out he lived across the road from David Fravor. Because his daughter had backed into his mailbox and broke it, and he went, "Oh, it's David Fravor." Really funny. The universe works in strange ways.
That is a crazy
And
synchronicity.
so Sully Arnott calls me up and says, this Godsmack lead singer guy, and I go, "Well, really? He's your neighbor? Well, get him on the horn. Let's talk."
Yes.
This was some years ago. And David goes, "Oh, yeah, that was, it had to be alien." I said, "Sir, with all due respect, that was how the Lockheed Skunk Works."
Really? That made the craft?
Yeah, that was one of ours.
And
he is now.
So because Fravor wouldn't say that now.
Oh, he did say so recently.
But in front of Congress, he says.
He's been told since then. He's corrected. So I said, no, that came out of the Lockheed Skunk Works. It's one of ours. It was something that they did on purpose to see this global organization, to see how our military would react.
So you think that Tic Tac was
absolutely.
Lockheed Skunk Works? Wow.
Similar statements have been made by Ross Coulthart that were met by the UFO community with skepticism, outrage, and some intrigue.
I'm going to leave you with one thought today, Bryce. I now know categorically that the Tic Tac is Lockheed Martin technology.
Okay.
The Tic Tac is Lockheed Martin technology. Why are we being lied to? This is the issue. Why is the United States government now participating at White House executive level in collusion with the national security state to keep secret the fact that they've made these advances? I suspect it's because they've realized that they're being overtaken by their foreign adversaries, and they don't want you to know that.
I stated previously in my video on Roderick Castle, I have no strong theories on if the Nimitz craft originated from the Skunk Works. I did, however, state I do believe there are human-made and non-human Tic Tacs. Here in that video, I explored if the Tic Tac was flying within the area of operations of U.S. Nimitz aviation exercises. This would imply the Tic Tac could have been gauging reaction types, times, speeds, methods, etc., of an unknowing force if it were enemy contact. Warning the pilots beforehand taints the results and observations. It is very disturbing to theorize that the Lockheed Skunk Works could have possibly tested on unwitting U.S. servicemen and ace pilots at that. But regarding the Skunk Works, there is a rather infamous set of quotes from a Lockheed Skunk Works director that seem to directly admit that Lockheed had harnessed non-human technology. These quotes are indeed contentious and worthy of exploration, so let's investigate Lockheed's second director of Skunk Works from 1975 to 1991, Ben Ritt, aka the Father of Stealth. The late legendary Ben Ritt is famous in the UFO community for a series of alleged incredible statements some take as an admission from a decorated Skunk Works director with decades of experience on SAPs. That Lockheed indeed possesses physics-defined capabilities and familiarity with quote-unquote ET, while others interpret these statements as hyperbole or possibly even fabrication. At a speech at UCLA in 1993, Ben Ritt would allegedly state, quote, "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do," end quote. However, these statements were seemingly confirmed by aerospace engineer Tom Keller, who wrote a MUFON Mutual UFO Network article in 2010. Confirming he attended this 1993 lecture and Rich did indeed make such statements. We also have former MUFON director, nuclear engineer, and UCLA alum, John Harzan, who stated he attended this 1993 lecture.
He ended his talk with a slide of a black disc zipping off into outer space. And he ended it with these words: "We now have the technology to take ET home." And the entire place broke up laughing. And Tom and I just looked at each other and said, did he really just say that? And are these people really not getting that what he's saying is real? And so we just kind of let it go. There was a polite Q&A session, and then the meeting ended. Well, about 20, 25 of us gathered up around him for a secondary, post Q&A like most speakers have. And it was very polite at first, people just asking questions about his career and different things like that. Finally, one lady said, how does this getting ET home work? He looks at her and he says, well, talks a little bit more. He's trying to ignore her kind of thing. So someone else asked the same question. So finally he said, let me ask you a question. Do you think it's possible to travel to the stars? He asked this of a particular engineer who had asked him a question about his career. And the engineer said, well, I don't know. It'd just take a long time to get there. He said, no, it wouldn't. We found an error in the equations, and we now know how to travel to the stars. And it won't take us a lifetime to do it.
Harzan would claim Ben Rich delivered some even further startling quotes.
And we asked him questions about it. What did you mean when you said we have the technology to take ET home? Ben shared three major things that I think are worthy of research by researchers worldwide at this point in time. The first was we've somehow figured out how to do interstellar travel already. It's known. The second point he made was that there was an error in the equations. My suspicion is it's probably Maxwell's equations for electromagnetic theory. The third thing he said was, how does ESP work? And I was really kind of startled because I didn't know what to say. But I blurted out, I don't know, all points in time and space are connected. And he looked me back in the eye and he said, that's how it works.
Remember this discussion of ESP for later, as it will oddly loop back into our investigation. But all this is to say we must take quite a bit of apprehension towards Harzan, as the former MUFON director would be charged with some very disturbing crimes regarding a minor. Perhaps we can also look to Jane's defense writer James Goodall, whose work I have previously referenced. Specifically, Goodall's discussion of black programs and silent flying triangles out of Area 51 Groom Lake, work I absolutely agree with. Goodall would claim one of his sources informed him that UFOs positively exist, while another source informed him, quote, we have things out there that are literally out of this world. Better than Star Trek or anything you can see in the movies, end quote. This source was actually Goodall's good friend, Ben Rich.
By the way, James Goodall, Jim Goodall's friend of mine, and he probably was the last man to talk to
Ben Rich
before he died. And he said, Ben Rich said, anything you can imagine that you've seen on Star Trek and this and that, we already have done at the Skunk Works. And then he said, it's not at Area 51, it's out in the desert there.
If you want to talk regarding Jim Goodall, I'll be happy to get him on the phone right this very second if you want to. We'll do this live.
Let's call him.
All right, do it.
This is awesome.
Hey, Jim, are you there? Oh, that's okay. That's okay. So just a quick review. I'm doing this in real time. I'm in Austin, Texas. I'm with Jesse Michaels. I'm doing an interview. We were talking about John Lear. We were talking about your good friend at you know where. So could you talk about, paraphrase here, talk about what Ben Rich told you at the hospital just before he passed away?
Just before Ben Rich passed away, when I was talking to him, he told me, and this is at the end of a 45-minute conversation, he said, Jim, we have things out in the desert, and he wasn't referring to Area 51. We have things out in the desert that is 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. I can comprehend a hell of a lot. And he said, if you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort.
I recognized that there were people in government that wanted to engage the public on topics that unfortunately had a stigma, even though they were based in scientific fact. At the time, there was no mechanism for them to do this. Through a series of meetings, I was soon connected to a large group of U.S. government officials from the CIA, the Department of Defense, and Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. These guys were the ones involved in the secretive U.S. government programs that dealt with these subjects. And they have all taken tremendous risks to themselves and their reputations to do something that can benefit the world. They wanted to be a part of something special, to be a part of a company that could not only change the way we see ourselves, but also change the path humanity is on.
I am equally intrigued in Lockheed Skunk Works' bizarre relationship with Tong DeLonge and To the Stars Academy. On Joe Rogan episode 1029, released on 26 October 2017, rockstar Tom DeLonge discussed the inception of To the Stars Academy, a group of his advised by Air Force Major General Neil McCasland, Air Force Major General Michael Carey, Hillary Clinton campaign manager John Podesta, Hal Puthoff, Chris Mellon, Luis Elizondo, Lockheed Martin Skunk Works Executive Vice President Rob Weitz, and 30-plus year Skunk Works veteran Steve Justice.
I'm working on things that defy imagination.
I believe that the technology not only exists, we've figured out how to play with it, but I'm not going to really get into that here. That is what we're doing at my company, though. That is the announcement. So Steve Justice was head of advanced programs at the Skunk Works, and the Skunk Works are who built, the famous secret bases you hear about. Skunk Works did, the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 stealth fighter, and
it's all Groom Lake out there,
all that kind of stuff. And he literally was in charge of all the advanced programs. So you got the boss, and you got him. And he just finished his career over there within the past 2 months, I think it is, and he was on stage with me when we came out and said we're going to be building one of these things.
To be quite honest, Tom would act as a trailblazer, discussing much of what I discuss here today on my channel, including, most critically, DoD contractors possessing non-human derived technologies and recovered non-human craft and biologics. DeLonge suggested To the Stars Academy, or TTSA, was restrained from releasing information still tightly held in the SAP world, and any inadvertent release of said information could be considered a breach of national security. So Tom and TTSA sought to utilize group investors to build from scratch free energy technology for energy and aerospace programs. By 2021, Mellon, Elizondo, and Steve Justice would leave TTSA, and the group de-emphasized a scientific focus to produce entertainment projects. The entire TTSA saga is so incredibly bizarre, as is the inclusion of figures like Mellon, Elizondo, and Puthoff, and institutions like Lockheed Skunk Works. Perhaps one day I will sit down to do a focused analysis on TTSA, as it seems to me DeLonge was indeed propped up as a mouthpiece to disseminate legitimate information. My mind does, though, immediately draw to DeLonge's book, Secret Machines, a roman à clef meant to detail real events overlaid with a facade of fiction. Essentially, Secret Machines served to deliver a science fiction novel fusing the imagination of DeLonge with actual events obtained from U.S. military officials and government sources. The alleged facts in this book were delivered by the commander of Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson, multiple Skunk Works officials, and others. In Secret Machines, DeLonge discusses reverse-engineered triangular aerospace vehicles that are capable of performing incredible feats. Of course, Lockheed Martin has been accused by Fouché and many others of developing TR-3B or similar models reverse-engineered triangular craft. This fascinating piece of literature, however, makes numerous mentions to an Astra Black Triangle reverse-engineered craft. Quote, "The craft itself, according to its data manual, was triangular and was named the Astra TR-3B. But we call it the Locust," said Becker with a smile. He was proud to be connected to it. The Locust had control layouts unlike those used in any aircraft he had ever seen, controls that were not just unfamiliar, but counterintuitive to anyone with a basic sense of aviation or aerospace physics, end quote. But what I really want to draw attention to is the description of the Astra's control mechanism. When characters in the book operate the Astra TR-3B Locust, the pilot's chair looked disappointingly like that from an F-16. But on the left armrest of the seat, sat a red sphere sitting in a cradle. These details are intriguing, as the cradled sphere control mechanisms matches identically that described by Mark McCandlish and Brad Sorensen that was allegedly used to control the Fluxliner ARV, another vehicle supposedly engineered partly by Lockheed Martin. Additionally, characters in the Secret Machines book were disappointed the pilot's chair was ripped from an F-16. Recall back to Fluxliner, both Sorensen and McCandlish described the poorly designed copy Fluxliner vehicles employed F-4 Phantom ejection seats that appeared extremely out of place in the hovering flying saucer. Again, perhaps we will cover DeLonge and TTSA more in the future, as I would like to relate Tom's efforts to the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies 10-month report, dated 30 July 2009, that was delivered while contracting under the OSAP program. There is a theory here that Tom was targeted by Elizondo and Mellon to execute an updated version of a leftover idea that was Project Forum, as detailed by this Bass 10-month report. Project Forum was a proposed 2010s program that sought to, quote, raise the level of awareness of the importance of ET and the potential disclosure in North America, end quote, by beginning in California. Would it truly be a UAP GERB video without connections to the Wilson Davis notes? An alleged memo recounting the greatest instance of a senior United States flag officer and intelligence official being gatekept from accessing the UFO Legacy Program portfolio. As I do in most of my projects these days, I will assume the viewer has some familiarity with the Wilson Davis notes. After all, covering this memo was actually my first ever video on this channel and featured references to Lockheed Martin. And regardless of the recent drama with Dr. Eric Davis's sources incorrectly stating the September 2025 UFO House Oversight Committee hearing was postponed, or Davis's apparent issues with myself, I still fully believe the fundamental facts of this memo regarding Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson attempting and failing to access UFO legacy programs are absolutely correct. But real fast, let's very briefly summarize this topic. In short, these disputed but highly likely accurate notes transcribed by Dr. Eric Davis were leaked from the estate of the late astronaut Edgar Mitchell. These notes recount a 2002 conversation between Davis and VADM and former DIA Director Thomas Wilson, outside of the parking lot of contractor EG&G. The conversation recounts Wilson finding but being stonewalled in accessing UFO recovery and material exploitation programs that were protected by the DoD's Special Access Program Oversight Committee, SAPOC's Senior Review Group, SRG, and a large defense contractor Wilson refused to name. According to Wilson, he was informed by General Michael Ward to search a special records group in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, belonging to special legacy holdover programs from before the Special Access Program restructuring efforts in the early 1990s. In the memo, UFO legacy programs were reorganized under the SAPOC SRG after an internal audit almost revealed the programs. This SAPOC reorganization began on the 5th of January 1994, when the Deputy Secretary of Defense significantly enhanced changes in the DoD Special Access Program management and control structures. This newsletter on screen now highlights those changes, establishing the Senior Review Group as well. In my video on SAIC, I built a strong case as to why SAIC was the contractor Wilson refused to name to Eric Davis, that served as an integral piece to the UFO Legacy Program gatekeeping structure. In this same project, I also analyzed the sitting DEP-SecDefs, SAPOC permanent members, and SAPOC SRG members, as well as outlined several such high-level individuals with direct involvement in the reorganization of special access programs between 1993 to 1994, that also served high-level executive or board positions at SAIC. Key individuals here include DepSecDef, who actually was responsible for the restructuring of SAPOC, William J. Perry, and his immediate successor, John Deutsch, both of whom served on the boards of SAIC. In Deutsch's case, the accomplished professional also served as Director of Central Intelligence, a professor at MIT, enjoyed numerous positions within the DOE, and additionally served as a consultant pre-work on SAPOC with TRW, Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and the MITRE Corporation, 3 institutions I have directly accused of being involved in UFO legacy programs. In my first ever video on this channel, I wagered the unnamed contractor, whose name Wilson refused to even utter, was indeed Lockheed Martin. However, post my SAIC video, I still maintain the contractor in question is indeed SAIC. But that's not to say Lockheed Martin is not a critical piece laying in the shadows of discussion of the Wilson-Davis notes. In fact, perhaps Lockheed is a critical component to the reorganization of SAPOC itself, that in the Wilson-Davis notes led to the reorganization and restructuring of UFO Legacy Program operations. In the SAIC video, I explored a theory that the need for UFO Legacy Programs to restructure the Special Access Program Oversight Committee to avoid any further instances of exposure through audits actually arose from a General Accounting Office May 1993 report titled, quote, DoD Special Access Programs Administrative Due Process Not Provided When Access is Denied or Revoked, end quote, which discussed the Navy and Air Force not complying with DoD Regulation 6200.2-R, which discussed Special Access Program accesses. Interestingly enough, the Army did comply in some cases here according to this GAO document. According to some of my research, this actually makes sense to me, as I am familiar with cases in which the U.S. Army seemed to operate UFO material exploitation programs in a strict, controlled environment with oversight, while Navy and Air Force legacy programs seem to operate far more loosely. Well, perhaps we can find even more context here from the U.S. General Accounting Office that actually highlights Lockheed's work on black budget SAPs as the nexus for this early 1990s audit that allegedly almost exposed UFO legacy programs. On screen now, observe an August 1986 GAO report to the U.S. SecDef titled, quote, Need for DoD Inspections of Special Access Contracts, end quote. This report detailed GAO investigations into critical missteps in carve-out program security protocols, specifically poor document control systems over classified special access documents at the Lockheed Corporation's Burbank plant. And recall Lockheed's Burbank plant actually served as the spawn point for Skunk Works in 1943. It is quite interesting how by 1992, 6 years after this GAO report, Lockheed had pulled all aerospace activities from Burbank. According to a 24 July 1986 report titled, quote, Controls over classified documents for a special access program at Lockheed Corporation, end quote, written by Martin M. Ferber, Associate Director, National Security and International Affairs Division, attempts to periodically analyze compliance with security requirements within special access programs arose all the way back in 1965. Pre-1965, each military service or DoD component was responsible for security administration over all contracts within their associated industry. To preclude inconsistencies and duplication, especially for contractors doing business with more than one service or component, the Defense Investigative Service, now called the Defense Security Service, was given responsibility for security administration over practically all of DoD's contracts, conducting semi-annual on-site inspections of contractor facilities to check for compliance with security requirements. Funny enough, in that same year of 1965, DoD decided, due to the sensitive nature of SAPs themselves were outright excluded from supervision by the Defense Investigative Service. Defense Investigative Service was only allowed periodic inspections to SAP-Fs, or SAP facilities. In this document, Ferber gives us some interesting information into special access programs, discussing that a SAP may be created on a specific showing that, quote, normal management and safeguarding procedures are not sufficient to limit need to know or access, and the number of persons who will need access will be reasonably small and commensurate with the objectives of providing extra protection for the information involved, end quote. SAPs, of course, feature their unacknowledged counterparts, USAPs, and most SAPs involved contractors and special access contracts. And here we can discuss the difference between SAPs and carve-out contracts, aka special access contracts. Carve-out contracts are called such because they are carved out of the Defense Investigative Service's Periodic Inspection Program. Carve-out contracts are SAPs that contractors manage with minimal oversight and extensive freedoms. Carve-out contracts often experience even less oversight than traditional SAPs or USAPs from which they are carved from. Today, carve-out programs are exempt fully or partially from Defense Security Service inspection requirements, feature extraordinary classification and security mechanisms, and require quote-unquote special oversight. How intriguing is it, Lockheed's Burbank Skunk Works site, that I and others have associated with running UFO Legacy Program SAPs, was investigated for poor carve-out security controls by the GAO in 1986. Was this audit the smoking gun of Lockheed UFO Legacy Programs being nearly outed that actually led to the reorganization of SAPOC and allegedly restructuring and recompartmentalization of UFO Legacy Programs under SAPOC SRG? Well, as it turns out, this gets even more interesting. At this time, Lockheed's carve-out programs were required to deliver a complete inventory of all top-secret materials at least annually, and a random inventory inspection was conducted every 50 days of at least 10% of all classified material. GAO's investigation into Lockheed's accountability over classified documents associated with a major special access program revealed Lockheed had not been performing the required classified inventory count at most of its 53 document control substations. In fact, after the GAO conducted counts of inventory at all 53 document control substations, Lockheed displayed 1,460 discrepancies out of 40,000 secret and top-secret items. 235 of these discrepancies were investigated by Lockheed and reported. 11 discrepancies were listed as unresolved, with Lockheed reporting some files had been physically destroyed, and 224 of these cases were actually resolved. This still, however, left several hundred discrepancies in Lockheed's classified inventory count. And again, I'll ask the question, did this GAO investigation nearly expose Lockheed's legacy program operations? Well, there is even further data to suggest so. We can actually look to Jacques Vallée's excellent book, Forbidden Science 5: Pacific Heights. In an entry titled 24 September 2004, Vallée detailed one Charles Boucher, Comptroller General of the United States under President Reagan from 1981 to 1996. Vallée discussed how Boucher found a crashed UFO program during a massive audit of classified projects. Quote, less than a handful of officials knew about it, end quote. According to Vallée, Boucher contemplated turning his findings over to DoD for prosecution. However, a quote, powerful person in DoD quenched it, end quote. Could this person in DoD possibly have been the man to whom the 1986 GAO need for DoD inspections of special access contracts was addressed? Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger. If Weinberger SecDef under Reagan from 1981 to 1987 sounds familiar, well, this is because he was mentioned a handful of times in my video on naval UFO legacy programs. Within this project, Weinberger was mentioned lying about the clandestine National Underwater Reconnaissance Office's operations in Swedish waters in '81. as well as Weinberger being involved in later 1980s investigations into various contractors, such as the Grumman Corporation egregiously overcharging DoD for simple parts, a possible funding mechanism for UFO programs we discussed earlier. Possibly, the US SecDef did at one point, or still does, have some senior oversight into UFO Legacy Program operations. After all, Weinberger's successor, Frank Carlucci, has served as a suspect of mine as an attendee to the 1988 Norton Air Force Base Air Show, where the alleged flux liners were displayed.
Harry Reid, God bless his soul, made this disclosure a couple weeks after we met in the New Yorker, and you can look this up. I think it was like a May 2021 New Yorker story where he says, I knew for decades, and he made this disclosure, not me, so I'm going to say the name of the contractor. Harry Reid said this. We knew that Lockheed Martin had this material for decades. I tried to get access and I was denied. And specifically with the Lockheed Martin stuff, he was talking about during the OSAP program. And for the people who are on this program, I submitted this to the officer, got this cleared, so don't freak out, but I'm telling the truth here. So Lockheed Martin wanted to divest itself from this material at a specific facility that's known to me, that I provided to the Inspector General, like street address, all that, right? And the idea was if they made a catcher's mitt, a security catcher's mitt for the most serious SAP possible, the contractor and the other government customer, which was the Central Intelligence Agency, for that specific Lockheed material, and it was they recovered from like the 50s and stuff, and it was like bits and pieces of like hull structure like that. But going back to that transfer with Lockheed, long story short, can't get into all the nuanced details, but basically the CIA said F you to DIA and Lockheed, and it was totally killed. So Harry Reid's request to get the material transferred to the OSAP program was totally killed because of bureaucracy and kind of fiefdom stuff.
Okay, moving on. Are any of you willing to name specific gatekeepers within the root cell of the UAP-SAP Federation?
You mean specific people and contractors that have dealt with this and kept the secret?
Specific individuals.
Well, one of them was named Dr. James Ryder at Lockheed. But, again, to emphasize, I don't fault these contractors for doing what they were asked to do by our government. They're supposed to lie if people ask about it. And the intelligence agencies who gave this stuff to them, CIA, I think primarily, told them to keep it quiet. And they've done that. And I suspect that they'd like an off-ramp. I have a name for you.
Go ahead.
Glenn Gaffney, CIA.
Glenn Gaffney, CIA.
Lockheed Martin's most direct, infamous, and intriguing accusation of possessing non-human craft and technologies features actually a ridiculously extensive paper trail, as well as a prospective Special Access Program, or PSAP, created for non-human material transfer. Many here have now heard of the Lockheed Martin attempted non-human material transfer to Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, administrated by the Defense Intelligence Agency-sponsored OSAP program that took place between 2008 and 2011 that was stonewalled and blocked by elements of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. This incredible event saw Lockheed Martin attempt to willingly divest themselves of UFO materials. Some reports state these materials included a craft hull and bits and pieces of materials. Some other sources state this was actually the 1953 Kingman, Arizona craft, or part of it. Kingman, of course, is one of my all-time favorite cases, so I do highly recommend checking out my documentary on the crash retrieval. I myself have talked about this material transfer on numerous occasions, mostly to discuss the importance of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, or DS&T, in UFO Legacy Program operations, and how CIA DS&T Deputy Director Glenn Gaffney was directly involved in the stonewalling of Lockheed's attempted divestment.
I think one WinPAC member recently mentioned kind of as a gatekeeper of legacy programs was Glenn Gaffney.
Yeah.
If you guys remember that from various reporting, I think Chris Sharp touched on it as well.
Did you ever interact with Glenn Gaffney?
I didn't have direct interaction with him, but the aerospace defense firm that we were trying to work with during the OSAP had direct interaction with him, as well as he was a senior VP, and the executive VP of the corporation had to have a conversation with Glenn Gaffney.
Yeah.
And he was very antagonistic about that company releasing to us under the DIA.
To NIDS.
Huh?
To NIDS, right?
To us, no, to Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies and ERTEC.
Right.
To release to us their collection of crash retrieval materials that they've had since before it got shut down in '89.
So let's take a step back here and fully analyze this incredible series of events. Let's reference the players on Lockheed, CIA, OSAP/BASS, who attempted to transfer non-human materials through a PSAP, and try to unravel this complex puzzle as best as possible. Because, after all, numerous reports claim Lockheed attempted not once, but twice during the span of 2008 to 2011 to divest itself of recovered UFO materials originating from the 1950s. The now infamous OSAP program, or Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Applications Program, and the ATIP, or Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, are programs central to discussion of this Lockheed material transfer. But information about OSAP and ATIP is incredibly convoluted, and it is wildly difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff here. What we do know is that OSAP was initiated by Senator Harry Reid between 2007 and 2008, and the program began in the Defense Intelligence Agency with an estimated budget of $22 million over 5 years. DIA awarded contracts under OSAP to Robert Bigelow's Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies LLC, or BASS for short. Now, for our work here, I will be using the official OSAP solicitation under solicitation number HHM 40208R0211 to draw details from OSAP, as many of the characters around this OSAP ATIP saga have proven to be actually quite untrustworthy. These include Luis Elizondo, who for years changed his story around his role as director or senior member of ATIP. Outside of presenting obviously false photographs of UFOs, I hesitate to trust Elizondo's word, as he formerly served in the early to mid-2000s as the Contracting Officer's Representative for the Counterintelligence Field Activity, or CIFA. CIFA, a former DoD agency, operated from 2002 to 2008 and was charged with protecting U.S. military personnel and facilities against spying and acts of terrorism. Information regarding CIFA's budget and number of personnel is still classified to this day. During his time in CIFA, Lou worked closely with the largest contracts in the entire CIFA directorate. According to allgov.com, quote, CIFA's top secret activities have not prevented it from utilizing private companies to carry out its highly sensitive counterintelligence activities. In fact, CIFA was one of the largest employers of private contractors within the U.S. intelligence community, end quote. From 2004 to 2005, CIFA awarded at least $33 million in contracts. And the largest winners here, Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. So please forgive me for leaving Lou out of discussions with respect to Lockheed, as there very may well be some conflicts of interest here. Additionally, one of the lead founders of OSAP, Dr. Jim Lakatsky, claimed he had actually gained entry to the interior of a recovered UFO craft, but recently stated he would lie to Congress if ever subpoenaed.
But if I could take one thing away that really struck me, it is the first time in history, I think, that we have somebody of your, Dr. Lakatsky, of your kind of depth within the intelligence agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and within the UFO program that you ran for the Defense Intelligence Agency, that stated, and I quote, the United States was in possession of a craft of unknown origin and had successfully gained access to its interior. So you personally know about a UFO that we got access inside of. I have to assume, Dr. Lakatsky, that you've seen this bad boy. You don't got to answer me, but I'm going to make that assumption unless you tell me otherwise. You also say that this craft had a streamlined configuration suitable for aerodynamic flight, but no intakes, exhaust wings, or control surfaces. So if I had to take something away from all of this, you've just made the admission that our government is reverse engineering. If we got inside of it, we're reverse engineering UFOs.
You see, I'm not speaking at all. I mean, I'm not going beyond what you read from the book. And going to Congress would be a red line to me personally, because I talk too much. I say too much, but I purposely cut it off right here.
Well, what if you were subpoenaed, though? I mean, you know, they're trying to do that in Congress. They're trying to subpoena people and say, hey, Dr. Lakatsky, you know, you've worked on
rumors about Dr. Lakatsky.
Okay, but hold on. If you're subpoenaed and asked to tell the truth, you're under oath.
First of all,
right? Would you tell the
use
truth?
The old phrase, let's cross that bridge when we come to it.
Lastly, I also have some issues with Dr. Eric Davis, EarthTech International and OSAP physicist and main character of the Wilson Davis Notes, and a character who is often revered as a champion of UFO disclosure we will arrive to shortly. According to the recently uncovered Bass 10-month report dated 30 July 2009, Bass operated for OSAP and the DIA under contract number HHM 402-08-C-0072, awarded 22 September 2008. This contract detailed Bass was to, quote, acquire buildings and ensure that they conform to regulations concerning the top secret security clearances needed to operate, and that the necessary qualified personnel would be hired and would be capable of researching advanced aerospace technology under the rubric of the following 12 designated areas: lift, propulsion, control, power generation, spatial/temporal translation, materials, configuration/structure, signature reduction, human interface, human effects, armament, and other areas in support of 1 through 11, end quote. By May to July of 2009, Bass reported substantial progress in the procurement of an underground vault. According to Bass, quote, the need for a highly secure underground vault operated by Bass became apparent in line with a Bass priority to pursue and acquire recovered hardware and biological samples from the corporate world and/or from private individuals and groups located elsewhere, end quotes. Within this report, Bass detailed it had designed a 5,000 square foot vault to feature 3-foot thick walls, ceilings, and floors that was to exist 15 to 20 feet below ground, with multiple tunnels, security doors, and at least one thick vault steel door. Bass actually aimed for this facility to be operational by late 2009 or early 2010. So why did Bass construct this facility? Well, now we can actually point back to Lockheed and the attempted divestment of UFO craft materials outlined by David Grusch. Grusch's discussion that Lockheed Martin attempted to divest itself of UFO crash materials to the OSAP program became quite tangible in late 2024, around the time of the November hearings on UFOs that featured Elizondo, Mike Gold, Michael Schellenberger, and Admiral Tim Gallaudet. Excellent UK journalist Christopher Sharp began reporting on not one, but 2 instances in which Bass attempted to transfer UFO craft materials out of Lockheed to OSAP within the DIA. Indeed, Chris Sharp reported the second attempt featured an attempt to create a prospective special access program that would operate as a waived USAP out of the Department of Homeland Security. This PSAP, to act as a catcher's mitt to secure the materials, was to be called Kona Blue. But these efforts were thwarted by CIA DS&T Deputy Director Glenn Gaffney, This reporting by Sharp became a reality in a packet of documents entered into the hearing record by Tennessee Representative Tim Burchett, alongside the November 2024 House Oversight Subcommittee hearing on UFOs. Now, I must preface here, the author or compiler of this document package is unknown, but I still find these documents well worth referencing. The first document details a DOPSR, or Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review document cleared for open publication on 6 September 2023. The document references a, quote, UAP material divestment plan proposed to OSAP leadership by Lockheed Martin Space Systems Vice President Dr. James Ryder, now deceased. A specific facility known to me was described as having crash retrieval materials from the 1950s and other historical operations. They proposed a technology transfer agreement into the proposed waived PSAP Senator Reid was championing, end quote. The document then confirms the technology transfer agreement was killed by Glenn Gaffney, sitting deputy director of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. Let's take a long time here to break this down. Vice President of Lockheed Martin Space Systems, Dr. James Ryder, willingly wished to divest Lockheed of certain materials to OSAP through a PSAP called Kona Blue. But the CIA DS&T blocked this transfer. These materials were held in a secure Lockheed facility and were recovered in the 50s. We really need to dive into this. Believe it or not, we can actually thank the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, an organization I regularly accuse exists as a honeypot for prospective UFO Legacy Program whistleblowers. For a declassified report on Kona Blue, the waived PSAP Dr. James T. Ryder plan to use as a vessel to transfer some of Lockheed's UFO craft and/or materials. Of course, this declassified slide deck by AARO did not come without strings. On 30 July 2025, disgraced ex-deputy director of AARO, Tim Phillips, claimed Kona Blue was established, quote, as the home for all this paranormal UFO crap, end quote. Phillips additionally attempted to claim multiple whistleblowers and individuals who made claims to Congress under oath regarding UFO Legacy Program operations would cite Kona Blue as justification for their claims. Of course, Phillips did not provide examples, rationale, or evidence to support these statements. Phillips' track record of such claims are dubious at best, as is his behavior pattern. Tim Phillips, similar to Sean Kirkpatrick, former head of AARO, has displayed a pattern of emotional lash-outs against David Grusch in particular. However, whilst Sean Kirkpatrick took the podcast route, Phillips seemingly likes to take to LinkedIn. On his podcast with Event Horizon, Phillips alluded to observing the Majestic 12 Psalm 101. On air, Phillips claimed the document had no images, drawings, or figures detailing the packaging of UFO materials. Off-air to various podcasters, however, Phillips would change his story, claiming the document was chock full of images, diagrams, figures, etc., dealing with material packaging. And I will leave this up to podcasters to state this publicly. But back to the D-Class Kona Blue slide deck. This Kona Blue deck immediately shows clear ties to the DOPSR-cleared document submitted to hearing record by Congressman Tim Burchett. We can see the DOPSR-approved document state Tara O'Toole of DHS Science and Technology was approached to set up this PSAP. Indeed, in the D-Class Kona Blue documents, we can identify similar information regarding O'Toole. Obviously, the 2011 DHS Kona Blue PSAP technology transfer agreement was killed and never saw the light of day. Official explanations here stated DHS and other involved agencies ultimately shut down the Kona Blue proposal due to skepticism regarding the authenticity of the purported materials. However, as we have already discussed here, there is more than meets the eye, including high-level agency backing to stonewall this transfer of materials through a government-controlled contract. Nevertheless, the slide deck is still quite intriguing, maybe another topic for another day, but for now, I would like to return to Lockheed. what about this Lockheed VP, Dr. James T. Ryder, that seemed to be willingly prepared for Lockheed to rid itself of some UFO crash materials, including craft hull? And if some of my sources are correct, the entire craft from the 1953 Kingman, Arizona crash. Why would Ryder and Lockheed be prepared to hand over non-human materials to a DIA program and other private contractor, Bass, who could become competition to Lockheed if it properly leveraged non-human technology? This is of course conjecture, but I have seen theories floating around, as well as both assertions from some of my sources and statements made by Dr. Eric Davis, that this specific batch of deliverable materials, craft hull, or the entire Kingman crash, was so advanced and beyond human comprehension that Lockheed had no success in exploiting the materials, chemistry, metallurgy, etc. since the 1950s. And Lockheed was confident that no DoD or contractor entity had the skills or ability to even remotely gain a foothold in leveraging this technology. In this theory and rumors I have heard swirling, Lockheed could have been willing to offload a small section of extremely complicated crash materials. And critical to note, not their entire or even close to their entire catalog of crash materials for myriad possible reasons. These reasons include Lockheed possibly wishing to position themselves as a quote-unquote good guy in a post-disclosure world, strategically placing themselves as a contractor willing to play ball, if so to speak, a contractor willing and able to share incomprehensible UFO materials to other contractors through official US DoD channels for the good of US national security in the wake of black budget programs. But I do want to mention, this theory Lockheed couldn't make heads or tails of this Kona Blue eligible UFO materials was actually referenced by Dr. Eric Davis, who said in our interview, UFO material exploitation programs were shut down in 1989 due to lack of progress, and these statements by Davis are quite disturbing to me. I mentioned earlier I did have some issues with Dr. Eric Davis, and it is time to revisit those. I love the man, and of course have infamously shared a salad lunch talk with him. Dr. Eric boldly told me to my face there are no such thing as alien reproduction vehicles, that humans have never successfully exploited any UFO technology for use in aerospace industry, let alone constructed quote-unquote copycat vehicles. Viewers of my channel will of course know I vehemently disagree with this statement and have considered multiple possibilities for this seemingly misinfo statement from Davis. These ideas range from an outright egregious lie to Davis not being read onto UFO USAPs that actively deal with adapting non-human technology to US aerospace platforms. Davis worked closely with the OSAP program for the Lockheed Martin material transfer. Therefore, I have also considered for quite a while the possibility Dr. James Ryder fed Davis these statements regarding ARV as a counterintelligence or program protection strategy. I have come to the conclusion Davis willingly lied about this statement, but that is another story for another day. Davis has seemingly acknowledged his professional relationship with Ryder on UFO Legacy Program operations. After all, in a 2019 interview, Davis alluded to Ryder and Lockheed Martin seeking out Davis in the OSAP project, pulling them in to the UFO Legacy Program fold.
The other unofficial way is, again, if you build a level of trust among certain individuals and people within the network who, after a few years of knowing them, you work with them, they know who you are, they know what you're capable of, they know your competencies, and they want to bring the topic up on an informal basis with you, sometimes not even on an informal basis. They may want to bring the topic up outside the realm of the security apparatus, but within a skiff. In other words, there's going to be no passing of security clearances to establish that I am going to be allowed to be read in on the crash retrieval program, but they'll bring me into a skiff and want to talk informally in the skiff about it and say, well, this is what we can tell you, but there's things that we can't tell you, and we can tell you those things if you can get the next level of security and authorization to get the need to know, and then we can do business with you. But before we get to that point, here's what we can tell you without having to cross that red line of the need to know and the proper clearances. So you work this stuff out over a number of years. You build networks and you find the right people, and then you don't do it by knocking on doors. You do it just through the happenstance of having a contract with somebody or a subcontract, and you're interfacing with them. And then lo and behold, you find out they're the vice president or the president of one of the legacy aerospace corporations, and they happen to be a PhD of some sort of their, some discipline, their own, a STEM discipline, all on their own accord. And it just so happens that they were a guy that worked on the crash retrieval program. Oh, lo and behold. And then they find out that you're working in UFOs. You're on the UFO subject for a DoD program. And they say, well, that's wonderful. You're officially a government contractor or subcontractor, and you're working with another aerospace company. Okay, well, and you're working on UFOs. Well, guess what? We did it too. And we don't do it now, but we did it in the past, and here's what we can tell you off the record, and here's what we can, and you'll have to go another step before we can tell you what it is on the record, but it has to be through that. Again, you have to have the right clearances, you have to have the authorization for the need to know, and then you can get the full story. So,
what is undeniable, however, is the fact Dr. Eric Davis and Dr. Hal Puthoff, an infamous UFO Legacy Program and Psi Program scientist, would work together with Dr. Ryder following his career at Lockheed at the Starfire project. Starfire tackled the controversial electric sun hypothesis. But what is important here is Ryder, Puthoff, and Davis all served on the Starfire Science Review team. Dr. James or Jim Ryder was not just some standard VP at Lockheed Martin. From 2004 to 2011, Ryder served as VP of Lockheed Martin's Space Systems Company and head of the Advanced Technology Center, an R&D organization covering a diverse range of tech, including solar and space sciences. Ryder unfortunately passed away suddenly in 2018, and I do not think there is some conspiracy surrounding his passing. Ryder was an extremely bright scientist, receiving a PhD in theoretical and applied mechanics, a master's in engineering mechanics, and a bachelor's in theoretical and applied mechanics from the University of Illinois before his almost 40-year career with Lockheed Martin. During the attempted OSAP transfer, Ryder was actively serving as VP of Lockheed Martin Space Systems Corporation and head of the Advanced Technology Center, which, by the way, is now called STAR. His responsibilities here included representing $9 billion worth of program infrastructure annually for Lockheed and Lockheed Martin Space Systems Corporation. These included, quote, overseeing research and development for the Space Systems Company, including remote sensing and space science, telecommunications and space-based navigation, defensive systems and strategic systems. The ATC research and development portfolio covers a diverse set of technologies, including phenomenology and sensors, optics and electro-optics, telecommunications and photonics, guidance and navigation, modeling and simulation, materials and structures, thermal sciences, nanotechnology, and space sciences, end quote. Ryder's portfolio of projects is quite intriguing to me, as I am aware of instances in which Lockheed Martin worked closely with the United States Army to apply optics and electro-optics cloaking technology to NGCV, or Next Generation Combat Vehicles, that was derived from metamaterials and exotic non-human technologies. Take my word for what it's worth here, but this effort, if true, alone proves Davis's comments wrong about no instances ever in which humans have applied non-human tech to human vehicles. Like his seemingly absent obituary, details on Ryder are actually quite thin. We can find work of Ryder in various DTIC or Defense Technical Information Center publications. These include a February 1981 document out of the Air Force SysCom Wright Aeronautical Laboratory Materials Lab. Ryder's work here was published on, quote, the effect of load history on fatigue life, end quote. Indeed, we can find a similar DTIC Air Force Syscom document from the Wright Aeronautical Laboratory from April 1982 that features Ryder. Here, Ryder is credited with, quote, stiffness, strength, and fatigue life relationships for composite laminates, end quote. What intrigues me tremendously are a series of talks Ryder gave shortly before his death in 2018. In June of 2017, Dr. Ryder was a speaker at the Arcane School Conference in London held by the Lucius Trust, a group that, quote, promotes recognition and practice of the spiritual principles and values upon which a stable and interdependent world society may be based, end quote. Ryder's talk here was titled The Rendering of the Veils Part 1, Fairies, Devas, and Unidentified Aerial Phenomena.
I use UAPs because a UFO is an unexplained flying object. But a UAP is unexplained aerial phenomena. And they're definitely aerial in that we see them above the ground. And they're phenomena because, what's that? But I don't like UFOs so much because it assumes that they're manned by some creatures from a different planet or star, so I feel like we've already just made the answer the question before we actually ask the question. And I want to mention, yes, veil a little bit, and then I'll go through these charts pretty quickly. The more I thought about veil, I actually liked it better when I went and looked it up. But veil, if you look it up in a good dictionary, is a deceptive appearance or a masking layer.
Of course, this esoteric discussion does not see Ryder reference or even comment on his own work on UFOs in a capacity for Lockheed Martin. But Ryder includes some tremendously fascinating slides and comments within this discussion. These include Ryder referencing cave art and ancient drawings of what appear to be UFOs and non-human beings. Ryder would even reference crop circles, UFO videos, and interestingly, the 1980 Rendlesham Forest incident. Ryder gave two more incredibly interesting talks prior to his passing with the Lucius Trust. Let's then also reference this 2015 talk titled, quote, The Soul is Light. What then is light? End quote. I highly recommend this talk for my audience who is interested in the merging of esoteric principles with physics. The talk here is quite engaging, with Ryder touching on everything from the Big Bang theories to comparing light and esotericism to discussing human consciousness. Ryder even thanks Hal Puthoff in this conference.
As my friend Dr. Puthoff said, it's like the manifest universe is instantly, intrinsically interconnected. And that space-time is some kind of an entangled cosmic matrix, whatever that means yet. All beings are in an interpenetrating, interdependent field at all times, interconnected at all levels. This isn't coming out of any esoteric reading. This is coming out of science starting to face what's in the world. As he wrote, the boundary lines dissolve between the physical and metaphysical. Dr. Puthoff is a physicist in the United States, has been involved in this a long time, and this was recently published in a major book this last fall.
Lastly, I want to cover Ryder's talk given with Lucius Trust, titled, quote, The Garment of God, end quote, given the same year of his death in 2018.
If you wanted to study certain kinds of things related to what's called ESP in the United States, until very recently, you had to hide it very carefully because you were crazy and then the government didn't want people to think they're supporting crazy stuff. But if you wanted to do the work in Russia, go right ahead. Fine, here's your money. Because they're not caught in the religion that says it's not possible. It's a very interesting way to think of these two countries.
Does this remind anyone else of the words of Dr. Eric A. Walker, self-admitted UFO crash retrieval scientist among Vannevar Bush's OSRD and present member to the 1965 Kecksburg, Pennsylvania crash? Walker told UFO researcher Henry Azadahel when referencing gaining access into UFO Legacy Program's, quote, How good is your sixth sense? How much do you know about ESP? Unless you know about it and how to use it, you would not be taken in. Only a few know about it, end quote. And how bizarre is it here that a Lockheed VP that almost certainly had access to high-level UFO Legacy Program SAPs would discuss the importance of ESP, as did, allegedly, the second director of Skunk Works, Ben Rich. Jim Ryder appeared to be a genuinely incredible man with insatiable curiosity and openness to understand the world around him. Was his retirement quest to pursue esoteric and consciousness-related ideas a result from his experiences with recovered non-human vehicles? Well, this is of course unknown. And just how extensive was his involvement at a VP level in Lockheed Martin TUO or Technologies of Unknown Origins exploitation programs? Well, this is also unknown. Though his motives and rationale for attempting to offload some Lockheed UFO materials followed Ryder to the grave, maybe he did have some noble intentions to bring more into the fold to study UFO materials. Ryder, in a way, reminds me of U.S. Army Futures Command Colonel Carl Nell, who took the UFO community by storm with his definitive statements regarding a non-human presence on this planet.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Carl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
Nell has served as an outspoken advocate for David Grusch and the existence of technologies of unknown origin. One has to wonder if this zero doubt arose from Nell's deputy CTO and director of systems engineering and integration for 13 years on Northrop Grumman, or possibly as a senior systems engineer for 2 years at Lockheed Martin, where he was, quote, responsible for mission-critical operations of a sophisticated national satellite constellation. After all, while serving as Northrop's deputy CTO, Nell was additionally serving as command representative to U.S. CENTCOM for Army Foreign Material Program. In 2025, Nell would speak at Archives of the Impossible convention, where his discussion of UFOs started to touch into similar ideas of consciousness, metaphysics, and more, similar to Ryder shortly before his death.
Consciousness isn't just part of the esoteric and metaphysical experience, but it can be brought under the aegis of some sort of expanded science. And once we do that, then we can engineer with that. So these things, I think, are heretical in the sense that people don't accept them, and it results in really a firewalling off of whole aspects of reality. And our sort of I'll go back. Yeah, there we go. So I would submit that this idea of an agnosticism is really not a viable worldview, because you're missing these aspects of reality that are essential to an integrated picture. And frankly, any more advanced civilization that we might be dealing with in the context of NHI and UAP would have already got to this state. And in order to try to understand that, engage with it, we've got to appreciate that. The other concept is, their science has probably progressed to the point where they can do these type of engineering capabilities, and we may be experiencing that as well. Technologies that have sentience.
There is, however, an additional Lockheed VP who often worked with Ryder, allegedly, on UFO legacy programs. I do not know if this VP assisted in shutting down the technology transfer through Kona Blue, but a strong argument can be made with her ties to U.S. intelligence and CIA DS&T. And I would now like to formally identify this former Lockheed VP as a high-level member of Lockheed UFO Legacy Program operations. Meet Mary Sturtevant, former Lockheed Martin Vice President of Intelligence, Joint and Science Technology Programs, active in the year of the attempted transfer, 2011, who also served as Lockheed Martin Vice President for Government Affairs from 2006 to 2021. Sturtevant's background rivals any high-level UFO Legacy Program member or gatekeeper I have discussed on this channel before, including Donald Kerr, Sean Kirkpatrick, and Eric Walker. But super fast, to flesh things out just a little more, bear with me for a super quick sidetrack from Sturtevant. And let's quickly revisit who blocked the Ryder OSAP UFO material transfer: Glenn Gaffney, Deputy Director of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. CIA DS&T has been a frequent, tricky customer of my channel as an intelligence structure critical to UFO legacy programs. These include the CIA DS&T's involvement in UFO legacy programs and underwater UFO recoveries as highlighted in my Navy UFO Programs project, as well as the 2003 creation of the CIA's Office of Global Access by then CIA DS&T Deputy Director Carl Wolf. The CIA OGA has been implicated by myself, Chris Sharp, and others as serving as a logistics coordinating intelligence office for foreign UFO crash retrieval operations. And in my Navy UFO Legacy Programs video, a critical component of such clandestine programs alongside CIA DS&T discussed was the CIA Directorate of Operations, less formally called the Clandestine Service. But back to Sturtevant. Recall how I just mentioned Donald Kerr as a very senior, very qualified UFO Legacy Program veteran, and he is very poignant to reference while discussing DS&T and the office that blocked Ryder's divestment efforts. Kerr joined SAIC in 1993 as a corporate executive and vice president and director. Kerr's resume includes, quote, Director of Los Alamos from 1979 to 1985, President and Director of EG&G from 1989 to 1992, Deputy Director for Science and Technology, CIA, 2001 to 2005, Director of the NRO 2005 to 2007, and Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence 2007 to 2009, end quote. Kerr additionally served senior board-level positions at both SAIC and the MITRE Corporation, two of the largest entities I strongly believe are entwined with UFO programs. Now let's transfer that same analysis and scrutiny to Mary Sturtevant, former Lockheed Martin Vice President of Intelligence, Joint and Science and Technology Programs and Lockheed Martin VP Government Affairs from 2006 to 2021. Sturtevant is largely a ghost, with extremely little available information on the internet. Fortunately, sparse mentions a glowing celebration of her work by the NRO in Volume 3 of Leaders of the NRO, as well as old Senate Select Committee on Intelligence documents allow us to fill insights into Sturtevant's startling history. Prior to her government service, Sturtevant worked at BDM, or the Braddock, Dunn, and McDonald Corporation, where she, quote, conducted research and analysis on a wide range of defense and arms control issues, end quote. According to a White House statement on the appointment of Mary Sturtevant, the bright young professional also worked on technology transfer projects at BDM. Braddock, Dunn, and McDonald should not be a new name to returning viewers on my channel. I have directly implicated BDM and its 1997 buyer, TRW, as well as TRW's 2002 buyer, Northrop Grumman, in UFO Legacy Program operations. And quickly, for the importance of Sturtevant, let's review these. BDM was a technical services firm that headquartered at Fort Bliss, Texas, White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, and Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. BDM specialized and worked primarily with missile guidance, applied optics, electronic instrumentation, and radiation physics. BDM was founded in 1959, around the same time as MITRE and the Aerospace Corporation, two federally funded research and development centers I consider absolutely paramount to UFO legacy programs. BDM was named specifically by Commander Will Miller of the Wilson Davis Memo in the year 2000. Miller stated numerous government individuals, such as Defense Intelligence Agency directors, who in this case could have been Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, were isolated from UFO knowledge. The quote-unquote keepers of the secrets resided in DoD middle management, according to Miller, and civilian contractors like Boeing, Lockheed, SAIC, and BDM. As I stated in the Northrop Project, BDM could warrant its own video, but for now I leave you with this. I have talked ad nauseum of Major General Albert Stubblebine and how his department, U.S. Army INSCOM, or Intelligence and Security Command, and their previous Special Forces unit, the Intelligence Support Activity, or ISA, have been historically involved with UFO crash retrieval. In 1984, Stubblebine was replaced as head of INSCOM and went on to serve as vice president for BDM. BDM would even host an advanced theoretical physics conference the following year to discuss UFO reverse engineering opportunities. Stubblebine and Sturtevant could have certainly crossed paths at BDM. BDM also hosted Naval Rear Admiral Sumner Shapiro on its board. Shapiro, of course, spoke to Bob Eschler at the recommendation of longtime subject of this channel, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. Regarding UFOs, he himself had studied up close. Recovered UFOs that featured unique interlocking components that had to be disassembled in an exact sequence to be put back together. UFOs that teams would take the craft apart, pack them up, and ship them around the country to different laboratories. Sturtevant began her career at the CIA in 1985 at the Directorate of Intelligence's Technology Transfer Assessment Center as an analyst focused on the role of Soviet intelligence in the acquisition of Western dual-use technology. Sturtevant would also work within the CIA Counterintelligence Center before being recruited to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, where she served for 8 years. Sturtevant, quote, evaluated tactical military programs, provided advice on CIA programs, and served as budget director responsible for all the staff support for the annual authorization of the intelligence budget, end quote. Sturtevant would then return to CIA as agency comptroller, support director of Central Intelligence Strategic Decision, and introduced information technology to office functions. In 2001, Sturtevant was appointed to Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Intelligence Programs, National Security Council under George W. Bush. And this was before being named the NRO's Deputy Director of National Support from 2004 to 2006. Believe it or not, Sturtevant's resume does not stop there, but her online footprint disappears majorly around the time she joined Lockheed Martin as VP of Intelligence Joint and Science and Technology Programs. We can piece together documents and data to show she operated in this role at least from 2011 to 2015. 2011, of course, is the year of our thwarted technology transfer. But now is where I take a step to reference this conflict of interest. Gaffney and the CIA DS&T stopped Lockheed VP James Ryder from divesting UFO craft and/or materials. A fellow, very senior Lockheed VP and co-worker of this Ryder at this time was Sturtevant. Well, in 1999, Sturtevant was named Deputy Director, Clandestine Information Technology Office at the CIA. An office that formed and operated as a joint venture between the CIA's Directorate of Operations, which I have implicated in naval UFO legacy programs, and the CIA Directorate of Science and Technology. Did Sturtevant engage with Gaffney to thwart her coworker and block this technology transfer? Once an individual joins the agency, they are agency for life. Did Sturtevant's previous work for CIA, and specifically DS&T, command her allegiances far more than her position at Lockheed and co-worker Ryder? Well, this is of course unknown, but this is a fascinating new thread well worth exploring and a thesis I think is very strong. And perhaps we have more here to work with. I would like to take this moment to kindly ask for comment from Christopher Mellon on Mary Sturtevant. After all, the two formerly had a professional relationship. We can see a 1989 memorandum for record regarding the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence with SSCI members Mary Sturtevant and Christopher Mellon in attendance. Before his higher-level roles within US DoD, Mellon did serve as a professional staff member on SSCI from 89 to 96. I will preface, Sturtevant and Mellon attending perfectly normal SSCI briefings was not a one-off. We can see on screen now, at least up to 1992, the two continued to both attend various professional briefings. And through 1996, specifically the period of 1 January to 31 March 1996, the two displayed identical per diem and transportation costs, implying the two likely traveled to and attended the same series of meetings in this period. My good friend and incredible researcher Rob Jones has introduced a third party possibly involved or responsible for thwarting Ryder's efforts, with strange ties back to Lockheed. Outside of Gaffney and possibly Sturtevant, the research of Jones, the words of Eric Davis, and reporting of journalist Christopher Sharp has brought forth one Robert Cardillo as a possible final authority in blocking the material transfer. At the time of the Lockheed transfer, Cardillo served as DDNI, or Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Intelligence Integration. Cardillo served numerous, and I mean numerous, high-level positions within U.S. intelligence. Outside of his role as DDNI, these positions included 6th Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, and the Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. While not definitive, and Cardillo's veto of Lockheed transferring UFO materials through a waived PSAP is still alleged, Jones details some rather intriguing and compelling data surrounding Cardillo. In his excellent work Sub Rosa, Rob Jones explores the question of, following the failed Kona Blue efforts, if Lockheed Martin still actually wished to offload certain UFO materials, craft, and parts, and what ultimately became of these materials after 2 failed efforts. Here, Jones offers a compelling theory. Lockheed sold or otherwise transferred these materials to the Psi organization. The Psi organization rose in 2010 from the sell-off of Lockheed Martin's Enterprise Integration Group, EIG, a quote, unit deeply involved in highly classified systems engineering for U.S. intelligence agencies, end quote. Veritas Capital, who is the focal point of Jones's incredible research here in Sub Rosa, and no, I won't dive too much into Veritas, as this is, in my opinion, Rob Jones's magnum opus, acquired this former division of Lockheed for $815 million in cash and promptly rebranded it as the Psi Organization, Inc. Acquisition of Lockheed's EIG allowed Veritas Capital to enjoy a significant portion of Lockheed's Black program work, including contracts with the NSA, NRO, CIA, and private defense industrial base contractors. Psi Organization was, in 2014, merged under Veritas Capital with Kinetic, rebranding this new entity as Vencor. Containing numerous legacy Black programs from the days of Lockheed EIG, Vencor was then merged again under Veritas Capital with other firms to create Perspecta, Inc. In 2021, Veritas Capital brought back Perspecta, Inc. under private ownership, forming Peraton after a transaction of $7.1 billion. Recently, Peraton even acquired Northrop Grumman's federal IT and mission support services for $3.4 billion. So essentially, Rob's theory states, in 2010/2011, after successful thwarting attempts by Cardillo, Lockheed may have proceeded to successfully offload materials through the Psi organization, an $815 million cash transaction that saw Lockheed Martin's Enterprise Integration Group purchased by Veritas Capital. Eventually, after a complex series of business dealings, many of Lockheed's Black program projects, and possibly some UFO materials, evolved to exist under a group called Peraton. Well, here is where this gets interesting. In May of 2019 to the present day, Robert Cardillo joined Peraton on the board of advisors.
So by 2019, Cardillo joined the board of the very group that may have received Lockheed's divested UFO materials. After all of this, questions still remain. What UFO materials were Lockheed trying to divest? Why did elements of the intelligence community stonewall the transfer, and what became of these materials? Well, to answer these questions as concisely as possible in a conclusion/summary to this incredibly long segment, I believe with rather moderate to high conviction, the materials in question was part to the entirety of the 1953 Kingman, Arizona crash. I believe James Ryder may very well have been a wild card, and this specific wreckage proved challenging for Lockheed to study and exploit, so Ryder wished to bring in fresh teams and fresh minds. I also believe elements of the IC, specifically the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, likes to maintain strict organization and program oversight to UFO Legacy Program operations, and wish to maintain the status quo and not invite new, fresh contractors into the UFO portfolio without full agency support. Especially when these new prospective organizations are defense contractors, and not agency-supported and staffed and highly trusted advanced UFO research and development experts, federally funded research and development centers. I believe Rob Jones presents a compelling theory that Lockheed severed a limb of its own in a complex business transaction with Veritas Capital to finally get rid of these specific materials. All this is to say, I do not under any circumstances think that the attempted Kona Blue PSAP would have seen Lockheed divest itself of its entire UFO portfolio. Just as I do not think that Lockheed was supposed to deliver its materials back to US DoD in 1989, per the words of Eric Davis. As many who watch my channel know, I strongly theorize Lockheed is involved in all aspects of UFO Legacy Program operations, ranging from crash retrieval to material exploitation to technology reverse engineering to alien reproduction vehicle prototyping, construction, and testing. I strongly suspect that Kona Blue offers us a hyper-specific look at just one slice of the Lockheed Martin UFO Legacy Program portfolio that dealt with a particularly complex and challenging selection of craft materials. My friends, it is Gerb, and like always, if you are still with me to this point, thank you so much for joining me on what I consider an extremely special investigation and adventure into Lockheed Martin. Now, before we do my usual rant, there is a thanks in order here. I need to thank Xander Jones of the Dreamland Motel channel for providing the excellent music today. Absolutely excellent. Xander Jones is super talented, and not only is his music good, but his channel's awesome as well. He's also the producer for the Night Shift channel run by Clint Weldon. You can see I'm wearing their merch right there. Clint and Xander are both friends of the channel. Love those guys, love both of their channels, so check them out. You guys know I don't usually do or have ever done shout-outs, really, so yeah, just a huge thanks to Xander. He's really helped me level up the game with the music, and he's great. But let's dive into things now. As I said at the very beginning, we have covered Lockheed on this channel before, and in most of my videos, whether it's TR-3B in triangles or Northrop Grumman or really anything, Lockheed is always a general topic. Now, I was thinking back and I rewatched my original Lockheed video for this project, and what I wanted to do for this project was almost not touch on anything I spoke about in my original Lockheed project. As I stated, I believe that project was unfocused. I believe it was not deep enough, and I think I went the wrong routes in that project. I was looking more so at Don Phillips, Boyd Bushman, the glamorous whistleblowers, Fouché, who's, yeah, I know I pronounced his name wrong then, but I looked in the wrong directions, and for this project, I have been wanting to do this for quite a while, to get back to my roots and use the same sort of approach I have used with SAIC and Northrop Grumman to investigate Lockheed. And so I'm thrilled to have revisited this, and of course, this project is about 2 hours and 15 minutes longer than that original venture, which was already like 35 minutes, I think my longest video at the time. And I think that we have a special investigation here, and let's go through bit by bit. I tried hard, as I just said, not to kind of retread on old ground I've touched on with Lockheed, and It could have been all too easy to spend the vast majority of this video just re-talking about Fouché and Lockheed working as a prime contractor on TR-3B, but for the first part of this project and some of the initial stuff, I really wanted to drill in on the Defense Industrial Base. Now, this is one of the, not first, but one of the newer times I've really hammered in on the subject of Defense Industrial Base. I, of course, discussed the Defense Industrial Base contractors with Ellen Lord and SAIC when Ellen Lord expanded DIB contractors' access to SAP scientists, SAP security, DoD assets, etc., and then she ran off to SAIC. But the Defense Industrial Base is a very, very, very wide term. Of course, it encompasses defense contractors, it encompasses MRTFBs, it encompasses RDT&E labs, it encompasses FFRDCs and UARCs, and I think that if you start to look at clandestine RDT&E, USAP, CAP, SAP, you can start to really look at the DIB from the outside and start to piece a lot of things together. As we talked about, 9 out of the 10 largest defense contractors in the world I have directly accused or have come across information operate in UFO Legacy Program operations, as well as how many MRTFBs are there? I might be getting this wrong because I'm doing my rant, but I believe 23. And at least 16 of those, same thing, come across various claims or my own research or sources I trust greatly who have talked about various MRTFBs. Same with the FFRDCs and UARCs. And if you skip through that entire video and are just joining me now for some reason, which I don't know why, remember, the way that I analyze UFO Legacy Program operations, I try and really focus in on the missing link of these programs. When many people speak, they think that the US DoD or IC, and we're not talking about the people who use the enigmatic they as the US government here, but specific aspects of DoD or IC, whether it's the Office of the Secretary of Defense, whether it's maybe DARPA in DoD, maybe DARPA, or, the NRO, NSA, CIA, and they say that there's just magical UFO legacy programs that these DoD or IC assets and agencies use with defense prime contractors like Northrop Grumman, like Raytheon, like Lockheed, like Amentum, like SAIC, and that's it. But the missing link that I try and point out are the FFRDCs, the MITREs, which is, in my opinion, the largest FFRDC involved in UFO Legacy Program operations, and how these subject matter experts and RDT&E aces kind of serve as project managers. And because these institutions are semi-private, the DoD and IC can still retain information control, access to materials that the FFRDC can then dole out to various contractors, and a need-to-know bigot list, access list, SAP cap basis. But what's interesting to me is it seems like Lockheed Martin has unprecedented access to not only UFO RDT&E, but also recovered craft, as we see in the Kona Blue. Lockheed has so many materials, Jim Ryder and possibly Mary Sturtevant can just get rid of a couple pieces of bulkhead as they see fit, because Jim Ryder wants that to happen for any number of reasons. It seems odd that a defense contractor could be so cavalier as to offload, divest materials of non-human origin. Now, why is this? The Lockheed Corporation has existed before most FFRDCs. I'm not talking about the Sandia, I'm not talking about the Lawrence Livermore, the Los Alamos, the DOE National Labs, but I'm talking about FFRDCs like MITRE, like the Aerospace Corporation. Most of these were started in 1959, 1960. MITRE 1959 after engineers on the SAGE project, which was a large radar array from, I think, Lincoln Labs and MIT started up MITRE, and aerospace spun off from TRW. But these were started around the time that actually Phil Corso said UFO technologies were starting to be seeded into U.S. defense contractors. But it seems like even before that, Lockheed may have been sort of a subject matter expert, maybe dating back to Roswell, maybe dating back to Magenta or other crashes, maybe even Aztec, perhaps the Lockheed Corporation, or maybe even Martin Marietta at this time, before the age of many of these FFRDCs, were analyzing some of these materials. So that's interesting that Lockheed may be, I guess, given the same weight or treated with the same respect or seriousness or access to information that something like an FFRDC or UARC would have from the DoD. So that's incredibly interesting. And speaking of DIB assets and MRTFBs, Of course, and today we really fast-forwarded in on the Nevada Test and Training Range, the Edwards 412th Utah Test and Training Range. Lockheed operates all over the place in these, but I think the most interesting piece here was this dive into Tonopah. Tonopah is a place that is almost never, ever, ever, ever mentioned. You might see on UFO Twitter or in a book somebody say, oh, Tonopah's weird. Tonopah is probably a program site. But outside of Richard Dolan speaking about his source at the UAP Task Force leaked class report talking about Advanced Group 6 and DARPA projects out there at Tonopah from reverse engineered materials, you see almost no mention of Tonopah. It is the DOE's, one of the DOE's, if not the highest DOE classified weapons testing location. And as we explored today, from 1993 to 2017, whether it be Martin Marietta or the Lockheed Martin Corporation, Lockheed had administrative duties over Sandia, which administrated Tonopah. So Lockheed worked directly with Sandia and Tonopah and the Edwards 412 Test Wing, which of course has occupied Tonopah like it does Area 51 and performed operations out there. Now, as I mentioned, I have specifically heard of the quote-unquote interesting stuff going on up there at Tonopah, and that's outside of Richard Dolan and his sources. And I would really like to learn more about Tonopah. There's not much else we can learn today because of the classification of the programs that transpire and are carried out in the weapons testing at Tonopah, but I also find the Site 4 at Tonopah quite intriguing. I have seen people try and say Bob Lazar ripped this off of Tonopah test range, but as we show today, Tonopah S4 or Site 4, in whether it be 4, the number or Roman numerals, is kind of out in the open and doesn't really comport with Bob Lazar's description of Area 51 S4 by Papoose Lake. But a very interesting location nonetheless. I also think it's interesting that the Navy took such a special interest in Tonopah in its early days, especially the Polaris program, which we know ties into Sand Dollar and DSRV and DSSP, and all of that stuff with John Pena Craven that I've been talking about for many, 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 many months now. Let's shift focus a little bit on Skunk Works. Skunk Works, as we know, is far more notorious and infamous than its counterparts at Boeing, at Northrop Grumman, at probably some secret divisions at Raytheon and so forth. And I try to largely sidestep around some of the quotes by Ben Rich today. I've talked about them before. They're interesting, sure. I think the James Goodall quote when he got on the phone with Jesse Michaels and Michael Schratt is the most interesting mention of Ben Rich, but the Linda Moulton Howe and Johns Harzan, who, was accused of some pretty heinous crimes, I don't really find an interest in searching there. And again, James Goodall. But I share so much frustration, as I kind of laid out in this video, with Stephen Greer saying that the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works created the Tic Tac in 2004. And of course, Ross Coulthart says that as well. But then stuff like that Michael Herrera's craft was out of the Lockheed Skunk Works as well. I understand if you can't provide evidence for such claims, but at least construct a thesis to explain why. And I think that's one of the frustrations a lot of people had with Ross Coulthart when he gets on Need to Know with Bryce Zabel and says, I know categorically that the Tic Tac is Lockheed Martin technology. That's already going to be a little tough for people to wrap their heads around, especially with the capabilities that Tic Tac demonstrated. So I think what would have been appropriate there is, even if Ross is going to be so steadfast in his confidence that this craft was either Lockheed Martin reverse engineered or a non-human craft being operated by Lockheed, he relies on his sources for this, and that's totally fine, but at least construct a thesis or parallel lines of research why that might be an adequate explanation for the Tic Tac, and then demonstrate that to the audience instead of just saying, I know categorically. But the Skunk Works is intriguing. I was thrilled to kind of investigate the 1986 carve-out security problems with the Lockheed Corporation at their Burbank plant, which of course housed Skunk Works, and related that to the Wilson Davis notes. That was shocking to really investigate and parse through. I mean, over 1,000 discrepancies in carve-out Special Access Program documents, many of which were excluded from DoD oversight altogether, some of which were lost and some of which were destroyed. I think that there can be strong connections here, that perhaps this was a domino effect, that various GAO, DoD, various entities that were not read into UFO legacy programs at this time started to see enormous carve-out contracts within Lockheed Martin, within Lockheed at this time, and other competitive aerospace prime contractors, and that these class documents at the classified document control substations and descriptions of programs, accounting for funds and so forth just completely wiped off the table. And that could have created a domino effect that eventually in 1993, UFO Legacy Program personnel had to reorganize the Special Access Program Oversight Committee and give enhanced strengths to the Senior Review Group, which in turn created the quote-unquote Watch Committee of the highest tier of high-level gatekeepers. If you remember, the Watch Committee served as a bit of a diverse group, including a corporate director. Perhaps that was somebody from Lockheed or maybe a Northrop Grumman type. I just think that's interesting. And I know I talked about the Wilson Davis notes, and I know that there's been some controversy around Eric Davis. In fact, I touched on some controversy around Davis in this project. I said it, I will say it again. Although things have been a bit odd with Eric Davis lately, and although I disagree with his comments about ARV, and I do think this is probably a program protection strategy he must display due to his time in OSAP, AFRL, or other institutions, I still very much like and respect Eric Davis. And regardless of kind of the questions of him of late, I still believe that the fundamental facts of the Wilson Davis notes are correct. That being that Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson was stonewalled in accessing UFO legacy programs. And speaking of Davis, I know that there were some, you could see him as shots fired in this video towards Davis and Lou Elizondo. I think it's important to, if I am going to speak about somebody or exclude them from a conversation, speak about why. Elizondo in particular, I showed that there may be some conflicts of interest with Lockheed Martin. It's the same thing that others have said. I do not think Lou has been completely forthcoming with his involvement in legacy programs and how much knowledge he has regarding those programs. You know, I think back to the 2024 UFO hearings in which he testified. I remember Nancy Mace asking, I think it was General Dynamics, about their specialty. And Lou says something about, various contractors have various specialties in this subject. And Mace retorts, what about Lockheed Martin? And you could see Lou kind of visibly squirm in that scenario. So I do think there is likely a conflict of interest there, that Lockheed Martin is an institution that requires extensive program protection, just as various other facets of UFO legacy program operations. So, that I think that was just important to include in the video, especially when talking about a beast like Lockheed. And that also leads us to the Kona Blue material transfer. Again, there were 2 attempted transfers by Lockheed Martin, at least 2, due to the work of Rob Jones and Sub Rosa, which please check out Sub Rosa. Rob Jones initially put that on a Substack to pay wallet, which I think is totally fine, fair pay for fair work. But due to some of the demand and the importance of the document, he made it free, so that will be linked in the video description, and I can't recommend reading it enough. I'm actually going to have Rob and Kermit back on for a live here pretty soon where we're going to break down the paper. And as we kind of explored with that, perhaps Robert Cardillo was involved in stonewalling the transaction of materials from Lockheed, and eventually ended up with the same company that Lockheed Martin severed its own limb, the Enterprise Integration Group, that eventually, after a bunch of corporate transactions, ended up at Peraton, on which Robert Cardillo serves to this day on the board. But per the reporting of Chris Sharp and actually the Aero Historical Report Volume 1, there seemed to be one initial attempt to divest these materials from Lockheed Martin to possibly an OSAP-like entity, maybe a DIA program back in 2008/2009. I'm running this off the top of my head, but I believe that James Clapper was involved in shutting this down, if I'm trying to remember correctly. But then, of course, in the 2011 transfer, this was shut down by the CIA DS&T, Glenn Gaffney, and possibly Robert Cardillo. Glenn Gaffney, I know, as I'm recording this just the other day, he appeared in an interview where Davis said he would want to string Glenn Gaffney up like Jesus. and essentially parade him around and torturing him. I think that might have been a little too far, regardless of how hostile Glenn Gaffney is. Treating a guy like Glenn Gaffney and getting him to speak is going to be very difficult. Of course, his program protection and allegiance to agency is probably lifelong. So subpoenaing the man, just like James Lakatsky, just like others, just like Sean Kirkpatrick, they can deflect on not answering due to national security concerns or just plead the fifth with their lawyer on every single question. So that's not the appropriate solution. I don't know. Maybe you can find an underling of Glenn Gaffney at the time and trade up for information on him and then be able to attack him from there, or possibly even trade up from Glenn Gaffney. But there's not a lot of people higher than CIA DS&T deputy directors. Glenn Gaffney, I think he has denied to reporters that he was involved in this material transfer. However, of course, he is going to say that. And I know I introduced Mary Kay Sturtevant today, VP of Government Affairs and Various Intelligence Systems at Lockheed Martin from 2006 to 2021. I know she worked closely with Ryder, allegedly, on UFO Legacy Program operations. And I wonder if she was involved in stonewalling the transfer. As we saw today, she directly had, well, her career in intelligence is quite impressive, to be quite honest, but all the way starting back at BDM with technology transfer with Russia and then moving into various intelligence agencies, eventually at the CIA working in a joint venture between the CIA DS&T and Directorate of Operations, two parts of the CIA I've accused of being involved in UFO legacy programs before, in my Navy video in particular, and then eventually goes on to serve as the deputy director for a various facet of NRO to then join Lockheed Martin in 2006. One has to wonder if she still had agency obligations at that time. I know there are a lot of individuals, whether it be private, DOD, a DARPA-like entity, that some people still serve as agency liaisons or agency points of contact. I think it's quite feasible that in her role at Lockheed Martin, because of her agency ties, and of course by agency I mean the CIA, that she still had allegiance or duties for program protection for the CIA. Rest in peace to what seemed like a great man, Jim Ryder. He seemed incredibly complex, as you can see by his Lucius Trust talks after he left Lockheed Martin. I think it's fascinating that these quote-unquote graybeards, quite a few of them possibly, like when they leave service in legacy program operations, seem to pursue really esoteric and the quote-unquote woo. We can see Carl Nell doing similar things with discussions of consciousness at Archives of the Impossible. So I find that absolutely fascinating, but I wish Dr. Ryder was here today. Again, I don't think there's anything suspicious about his passing. I just think it was sudden. But he seemed like a truly great and interesting man. With that being said, guys, I do think I am going to, maybe in a week or so, 2 weeks, co-release the Lockheed material transfer section as its own video. I mean, that's like 50 minutes. I just think it's really important. I know a lot of people don't really watch to this point. So I do want to get fresh eyes on that just in case people saw that. But besides that, like I said, I got the live coming up with Rob Jones and Kermit. Can't wait for that to discuss Rosa. Immediately as I'm finishing this, we're on to the next project, so don't you guys worry. Besides that, what are the usual post-video discussions? I have a Patreon. I don't gatekeep my content, so support what you think the channel is worth. Any support is greatly appreciated. Please like and subscribe please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every YouTuber says this, but every like, every subscription, every comment helps tremendously. I am blown away by how much this channel has grown. It's truly, truly, truly inspiring to me. I actually have a whiteboard in the other room. It was my goals back for 2024. I never erased it, but I said that I wanted to get my UFO YouTube channel to I think 10,000 subscribers. So this is mind-boggling to me. And I am forever grateful that so many people tune into this channel to kind of hear what I have to say and tune into my investigations. If all else, I just hope that some of the things I say, maybe even one thing in a video, is a jumping off point for people to start investigating on their own. I'm going to wrap this up now, guys. I think at this point, we're going to be over 3 hours, my longest video. And I don't know if I can do another 3-hour video again, because this video was a whale to edit. So yeah, again, got a Patreon. Don't gatekeep content. Please support what you think the channel is worth. Please remember to like and subscribe. And I will catch everybody on the next video. And thank you so much for tuning in. Bye, guys.